Welcome everybody to the CWMU Advisory Committee. My name is Justin Shannon. I'm the Chief of Wildlife for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and I'll be chairing the committee. To begin, I wanted to do some welcome and introductions and get a roll of attendees that are here on the committee with us. So I think we'll start. Eric, can we start down with you and work our way over?
I'm Eric Thacker. I'm the Rangeland Extension Specialist at Utah State University.
Michael Christensen.
Greg Wilding. Clint McLean.
Tim Price.
Mike Lauder.
Great. Do we have anyone online tonight? Is Joel Ferry with us? I don't think Joel's going to make it tonight, correct? Okay. Okay. We also have Chris Robinson with us as well. Alicia is taking notes for us tonight remotely. Alicia, can we do a mic check with you? Can you hear us and can we hear you?
Yep, I can hear you, Justin. Can you hear me?
Yep, great. So yeah, for the attendees tonight, then we have 7 committee members and we're missing Joel Ferry. So
is Chris Robinson in attendance?
He is. He's not here now, but he's in the building. So
oh, yep. Sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, that's it for the welcome and introductions. Before we move on any further, I think everybody got a copy of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Greg Wilding and seconded by Eric Thacker. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it passes. Next, we're going to have an update from our director, Jay Shirley. And so, Jay, do you want to come up to this mic real quick? Could that work?
Thank you, Justin. I'll get this where I can hear or talk into it. Thank you. As far as a director's update here, this is the update right here. So I honestly wanted to be involved tonight and come and be part of this meeting and listen to the processes. Thank those that are on this advisory committee and council for us in making tough recommendations that you do to both our board and to me. As a little background, I came through that sounds a little louder now. I came through our law enforcement section. I have been in our law enforcement section for almost 20 years and moved up to Salt Lake from our southeast region is where I spent most of my time. And so I've been involved in a lot of the processes that you will be discussing tonight and that you do every meeting. But I wanted to come and thank you today. I've been in our Salt Lake office for about 5 years, again, in our law enforcement section, and then about 6 months ago became the director. And it's been a wild ride for the last 6 months for sure. I'm learning a lot. I'm learning about this process. I was just asking someone, how appreciate you being on this and how long are the terms? And someone said, well, yeah, there are set term limits, but we try to get the best people on here and do the best job that we can. And some of that may be getting overlooked a little bit. So just wanted to express my appreciation for what you're doing. And if there's any questions that I can answer from our agency standpoint, we are at some obvious critical points, I think, in both the program. It has such great support. I was able to, and you might have all been there to the association meeting that was at the expo, the CWMU association meeting. I was able to speak at that a little bit and at least introduce myself there. But great program, great support from our agency for that program and from the public in general. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't come with its fair share of critiques, just like anything that we do. And that's a good thing. It makes us better in the end. And as an agency, I hope that you see that we're we're open to working through those tough issues and want to be a good listening voice and doing what our public needs and what our resources need. So with that, I'll just say thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Any questions from the committee to Jay? Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Jay's been an awesome director for us, super involved, really knowledgeable. And I was in his office today talking about this committee, and he says, I'm going to come see it. And I think out of all the things a director can spend their time doing, to come and spend time, I appreciate it. I also want to recognize Ashley Green. He's an assistant director. He was at our last meeting as well, and appreciate the support we have at our agency. Next on the agenda is the CWMU Advisory Committee process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think last time Covey did a really good job of going through the charter and the roles and the responsibilities with that. I will say for the first part, as we talk about consultation for CWMUs on public land, we're going to have Chad present some information to us, and then we'll have questions from the committee to Chad, a discussion with the committee, and then take some motions. And I think we've got some good ways to tackle this and break this down. Agenda items 5 and 6, we're going to hear from Chad again on some of these CWMUs that are up for renewal, that have private lands. Hear any additional information from the operators if they're here tonight with us. And then again, questions from the committee, discussion at the committee level, and then look for some motions. And I think that's about what we have on the agenda tonight. We'll have some time for other business. Not that we'll get too much into it, but if we need to build in future agenda items, I think that would be a good time to tackle those. So with that, Chad, let's get rolling. We'll move on to item number 4, consultation for CWMU public land review.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we get to be here. Like Jay said, I want to thank everybody for being here. I know usually it's a 1 meeting a year type of committee, but this year it's going to be a few more than that. So I appreciate you guys coming. We get to talk. I'll keep feeding you then. And we get to talk about public lands and CWMUs. Who doesn't want to talk about that, right? As Jay said as well, we do want to be listeners too. So the presentation today, I hope I don't mix up my words, but we're not really coming here with recommendations for the committee to vote on, but more presenting what our thoughts and our feelings are on some of these things. And sometimes they're going to be stronger feelings than on other issues. And then looking to listen to feedback from that, whether you feel like we got it right or not. So with that being said, Covey last time went over the charter. There are some responsibilities that the advisory committee has on here. I just kind of listed the ones that we will use or probably are applicable today. So one is hear complaints with fair and equitable treatment of hunters. I feel like that this is part of it because a lot of the reason we're here to talk about public land is public hunters feeling like the public land shouldn't be in CWMUs. Review the operations of the CWMU program. So part of the program is that there is an allowance for public lands to be in CWMUs, and we want to just make sure that we're having that be used the correct way. And lastly, review acreages that are under the standard minimum acreage or parcel configuration. So depending on what the outcome of some of these decisions we make today, it's potential that some CWMUs, if we pull the public land out, may not have those configurations, and we may need to look at potentially granting variances for that. So the objectives really to get a recommendation from the committee on at least some of these. If some of you may not have them, but there's four points that we really want to talk about. First one is accessible public lands. So this is public land that's on CWMU borders that are accessible, or it could be in the middle of a CWMU and there's a road that goes to it. And one other part is sometimes we've put, in a few of them, we've put some public land in the CWMU and it was kind of our idea as a division that we put them in there, and it was to help us manage populations. But we still want to visit those as well. Then we'll look at non-accessible public lands. So there's two types of these too. So you have landlocked private lands where it's pretty much surrounded by the whole entire CWMU, right? But we also have some others where it's not accessible to the public, but it potentially could be accessible from other private landowners. So we want to tackle those two items. Then as part of this, there's some trade lands that have happened, and we just need to kind of break them down. Now, depending on what happens on these decisions, like for example, if we say everything that's accessible is, we don't want that to be in CWMUs, then there's potential that there's a lot less trade lands going forward because it'd probably pull out their trade lands as well. But we just want to kind of tackle if they're beneficial to the public, what they should be available for. Is this, if they're a deer CWMU, is it just available for deer, or is it for all hunting activities? And then if there's additional public tag required. So on some of these, a lot of these, if they trade more land than they get public land, then they haven't traditionally given an extra public tag. And so, yeah, we just kind of want to tackle that. And then we'll need to look at the impacts of removing public lands from CWMUs. And so this, I was touching on this a little bit earlier. So potentially we're going to have some under acreage CWMUs, or we could have some non-contiguous CWMUs. And one of our thoughts is looking at them from a perspective of, I don't know if I put that right on there, old versus new CWMUs, but existing CWMUs is probably a better word than would probably look at existing CWMUs and having a more leniency on these variances. But it really isn't our intent going forward to create non-contiguous or under acreage CWMUs. Okay, currently there are 31 CWMUs with public lands. I'll touch on that a little bit. When I first started 2 years ago, I'm going to look at Mike because it was where it started, was the center. They started asking lots of hard questions, which was good because it got us to this process. But they asked a lot of hard questions. I know at that point in time we were probably at least 34. I can't remember if it was 34 or 36 CWMUs with public land. So from that point going forward, we've had well, between 3 to 5 CWMUs voluntarily take the public land out of their CWMUs. Wildlife code asset, it states in there, CWMUs are private to the extent practicable. So as we go through this, I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind. And code requires that RAC and board look at these CWMUs with public land at least every 5 years. So the intent here is that we look at them every 3 years. The CWMUs are on a 3-year cycle. It just makes sense when they renew, we look at their public land. One other thing that I just wanted to make sure was understood is that all of these CWMUs currently fit rule. None of our biologists should feel bad about CWMUs with public land. CWMUs shouldn't feel bad about having public land in their CWMU. They fit the rule currently. So sometimes things change and we have to look at them, but yeah, I mean, as it was stated, that's required by law that we look at these. So in rule, there's 3 allowances for public land. 1, the public land is surrounded by private land or is otherwise publicly inaccessible. 2, the public land is necessary to establish an enforceable and identifiable hunt boundary, or the inclusion of the public land is necessary to achieve statewide and unit management objectives. So first, we'll talk about enforceable and identifiable boundaries. Generally, I like to have people ask questions as they come up throughout this, but the more I thought about this, I think it's complex enough that I think there's a better benefit of going through this whole entire thing and then having questions at the end. But maybe think of if any come up, and this will be the first one we tackle after we get through the whole presentation, but We have 9 CWMUs where the public land is 100%, all the public land in it is available. And then we have 10 that have portions that are available and other portions that are not available. And then the other one that we talked about was kind of the ones that we said we need these for management objectives. And really there's only a handful of these. I think they're all in box elder. There's a large amount of public land in these CWMUs, and the landowners, the reason we did this is really this gained landowner support for specifically elk in these areas. If there's not CWMUs out there, there's going to be more complaints, more depredation, and more work, and probably less tolerance for elk. So our population number would be significantly lower. So then we'll touch on the surrounded or inaccessible ones, and there's 12 of these. As I kind of touched on earlier, there's 2 types. There's ones that are completely surrounded by the CWMU, and then there's others that other private lands would have access to. Trade lands, just talking about them. Some of the trade lands we have open up other public land. So they serve a good purpose there. But in general, a lot of times trade lands are not, we haven't been very good at getting the message out to the public of where those trade lands are and what they're for. And so with that being said, sometimes it feels like trade lands don't have a lot of public benefit just because nobody knows where they are or how to access them. Other things that we run into with problems with trade lands is just how to judge what the public benefit is from them. It seems at times that we get more acreage from the trade, but some would say that we get lower quality. Sometimes we get less acreage, but we might get a higher quality. And so to really have an objective way to determine if the trade is fair or if the public is benefiting from that sometimes can be difficult. So with that being said, then I guess we'll go back to I don't know if I can, let's talk about, I feel like I missed a slide, honestly, about the enforceable identifiable boundary. So
Yeah, Chad, real quick. I think for me as a chair, I mean, I've thought about how to break this up on the agenda, and if you'll see the agenda I sent out, I've kind of broke it up into the 4 bullet points, and that's just so we can make sense. So instead of having like long, crazy drawn out motions or discussions, my hope is that we could tackle portions of it, get some alignment or some recommendation back from this committee to Chad, to our director and the wildlife board, and then tackle it that way. So is that kind of where you're headed with it, Chad?
yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to go back to that first one, which I believe is the first bullet point on the agenda items, which is enforceable and identifiable boundary. I failed to mention, I said that we'd give you our thoughts on it, and I don't know that I did that through the PowerPoint presentation, but our thought on this is currently going, like, we haven't put public land in a CWMU for quite some time, and it's really rare. A lot of these were done a long time ago, and I feel that's how we feel as a division, is that it makes most sense that if it's accessible to the public, that those need to be accessible to the public. So, you know, when we're talking about the 9 with public land available, that's what our thought process is that those would become available to the public. The ones with some available and some landlocked, of saying that the portions that are available would be available, and the ones that are landlocked, we don't feel as strongly about that and wouldn't have a problem with the landlocked stuff staying in the CWMU.
Let's just process-wise, is there any questions for Chad? And there might be a lot of questions throughout the whole presentation, but if you have questions specifically on the public land that's accessible, or in this portion, the enforceable and identifiable boundaries, let's ask those questions to Chad.
I'm not sure I understand what available means. Is it like 9 CWMUs with public land available for whom, for what?
Yeah, and maybe it should be accessible. So we're looking at, can you drive to it or at some point get off and hike to it? Just if you have a legal right or access point to that public
So
land.
it's accessible would be a better.
Yeah, accessible would be a better word.
Thank you, Chad.
I have a question. So, well, a statement and then a question. I think that how this topic really came to a head was when the division recommended there'd be a, I don't know, 320 acre or so parcel of public land and be included with in the CWMU that thought they already had that as part of their CWMU. There's some cliffs and is that one of these 9 or is one of the 10, or do we have maps that show us which CWMUs and kind of examples of where your thought process was of why you would recommend 9 be included and 10, or 9 be excluded and 10 be included in that?
Yeah, and so this 9, this isn't necessarily included and excluded. And one thing we kind of wanted to do here is we can show some examples. I have some maps at the end of the presentation, but we really didn't want to get bogged down with specific examples. So that was, I think it was Junction Valley that you're talking about. And that is one of the 9 that it's accessible. It's not, I mean, it's a cliff area, it's a boundary, but people could get there. So that would be in that 9, but we're saying out of those 9 that all of the public land in those would come out. And in the 10, all that was accessible would come out. But if they have other parts in there, then those would stay in. And do you want to see a map of one or?
Oh, I thought you said that the division was fine with the 9, but with the 10, you're fine leaving that in there. So I thought you were kind of making a recommendation. So you don't have a recommendation. It's just, I guess I don't understand a little bit.
Yeah. Our thought process is that the 9 with the public land accessible, that public land that is accessible would come out of the CWMU and be accessible to the public. These 10, they kind of have a mix. They have some that's accessible and some that's not. So all of it in the 10 that is accessible, our thought process is that would come out of the CWMU, but the parts in that CWMU that are not accessible would stay in the CWMU.
So like Causey Springs, is it one of those? Are we talking about like a unit like Causey Springs?
So Causey Springs would be one of those 9. It's on the border and it's accessible.
So
Let me, let's look at one, Mike.
Yeah, maybe look at Causey Springs just to.
I don't have Causey Springs
Okay.
on here, but we're going to go to the one that we're actually going to talk about later with John. He's here, but this is Ingham Peak. So if we look at Ingham, I'm just going to walk over here. We see this is not accessible, right? It's corner to corner here, but it's completely surrounded. These little pieces are surrounded. So what I'm saying, our thought process is those pieces would stay in Ingham Peak, but you have BLM here that people could walk into. You have, let's see, all this BLM that is accessible, this little corner so what I'm saying is those pieces would come out of the CWMU, but these landlocked ones would stay in. Does that help?
What about the trade lands down further south?
Yeah, so trade lands is another topic. They have trade lands in there, and we would just have to tackle them. Obviously, if we said all of this public land's coming out and you only have those little bit, I'm sure that John would say, well, then I don't want to give you all of the trade lands that I'm giving, and it'd probably be closer to acre for acre as we work through that.
What's the policy decision? I mean, it seems to me that the division has made a deal with SITLA to make SITLA lands available for public hunting. they pay rent, some millions of dollars maybe. I don't, it used to be smaller, and my friend Dave Ear keeps twisting the knife, but nobody heard that, I guess. And so those state sections, you're including public land in that sense, because the state's paid to allow them to be usable for hunting.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, and in the 4160, you've identified a couple of sections. Where are the others that would come out? Are they hard to see from this angle?
Yeah, that's what I was seeing too. I got up too close to it, but and there's a line. So this BLM would be accessible. This, then that SITLA.
What value I know you don't want to talk about the exchange lands, but does having a monolithic block down south where those checkerboard sections are help, or is it that many people don't, you said it's hard to discern what the benefits are of the exchange? Is it because people don't know that they can hunt them, or just because they'd hunt them anyway because it's ungoverned territory and, it'd be hard to keep them from hunting, or what?
All of the above, in my mind, is that's where it's hard with public land is sometimes it was never posted as closed on these trade lands, and so people were hunting them anyway, and potentially the CWMU hasn't given up really anything. Sometimes it's hard to know, like, that's kind of flatter land, like, does it hold deer, elk? This is a deer, elk, moose CWMU. Moose probably not, right? So and then you have to, on the flip side, you have to look at it the other way too, because that BLM part that I pointed out, that's that bigger chunk, that probably doesn't hold any deer either, or pronghorn, or elk or moose.
Chad, real quick, I think we'll get to trade lands here in a bit. I think that's our third point that we want to tackle. And so I don't mind the questions and the discussion. I think it's fine. I do think what you're looking for, though, from this committee is when you're talking about accessible public land, whether it's on the border or whether it's a county road that drives to it. I mean, the take home is that you need really is, how does this committee feel about accessible public lands? And if the division were to develop a philosophy that these things should not be included in a CWMU to the extent possible, that would be the route that you would prefer. You just want to check. This is almost like a check with this committee, correct? To see how the committee feels?
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe I'll throw in another caveat too is with that, each CWMU, like John's here tonight, will have a chance to get up and explain the rationale and give a historic background of why the public land was in there. And so even though it'd be a guideline that we're saying we would follow, there would still be the potential for CWMUs to get up and represent themselves and say why it makes sense, or sometimes the reasoning why we put it in the first place.
So, as you said, the Central Region RAC was a big driver in, I feel like, this meeting. Is that a fair statement, Chad? And as a maker of a motion in that RAC, purpose of that direction was to not take all public land that's accessible out of a CWMU program, but it was to really scrutinize the value of that public land's inclusion in the CWMU. And the reason why I brought up Causey Springs, because I'm not familiar with a ton of CWMUs that have this issue, but I am a little bit with that one. And I know that what I've been told is that their trade gives a definable boundary, but the lands that they include allows them to trade lands that then allows access to a large portion of public property. So that's why I asked the question on if in the 9 we're taking that public land out of that CWMU, is that really a benefit to the public in the end?
Yeah, and so I guess how I'd answer that is this would be a guiding principle. If we come with here, the thought is that we don't want accessible public land in CWMUs, but each CWMU is going to come here and get a recommendation from this committee. So if there's any of those, maybe all 9 of them come up with some really good reasonings why, and all 9 of them end up still having the public land in there. But it's just our stance would be that we don't want public land in there that's accessible to the public. And just for some clarification, I think I'm one that have said that about Causey Springs, but there's some debate on that one even now, that as far as like, if there's not existing, I can't remember the terminology for it, but there may be a right of way without the trade plans, according to a deputy that worked up there. So that one's not as clear as it used to be in my mind.
Any other questions for Chad that deals with accessible public lands?
Well, Chad, are you trying to get us to give you an answer of whether we think that public lands that are accessible should be out or in? Are you asking us that question?
I think the question would be more, our thought process is, if it's accessible as a general rule and a general principle, that it shouldn't be in a CWMU, and looking to see if the committee has that same thought and can back that thinking, knowing that you will be able to look at each one. But Kobe's dying to talk, and I'm tired of talking.
Oh, I think this what I wanted to say relates directly to your question, and that is that, as we look at the CWMU Advisory Committee and what it is, you have the ability to make recommendations to the division and to the Wildlife Board, right? In rule, that's the authority that it lies under, that we discussed last time when we went over the charter. Now, the division has the authority to make recommendations to the Wildlife Board. So what we're really looking for is, we may have recommendations and thought process on these, and the committee really acts as a check to help us navigate some of these difficult issues and to help us think through, make recommendations to us about how you see things. And so what we're not trying to do is direct the committee as to what to do. What we're trying to do is present the issues. We may share some of our philosophy, and we want your recommendations to us as well. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Like, we're not attempting to steer or drive this committee. What we're attempting to do, we will share freely our philosophies or our thoughts as an agency, and that may coincide with the committee and it may not. And we just want an honest appraisal and evaluation of some of these issues and some honest feedback.
So if the heading of this slide is enforceable and identifiable boundary, if the question is in general, do you want to exclude public lands accessible by the public? I think you'd have to put a filter on that of saying, is there another public policy reason to do that, to include them, such as an enforceable and identifiable boundary, or such as and I know we're not talking about trade lands, but is there a trade that is more beneficial to the public hunters than leaving these lands in? But maybe if you just if you're after the general rule, and we'll talk exceptions later, absent those kind of caveats like I gave, then I guess my answer would be, yeah, generally exclude them. But it's, as in most things in life, the simple answer isn't always the right one.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe I should clarify that too. The reason enforceable and identifiable boundary has come up too is with the new technology, online mapping, that people can see where they're at. And that's what we hear a lot through the public process is at a some point in time, generally we put these accessible lands into CWMUs as an enforceable or identifiable. So whether it be a road, a fence, like we were talking earlier, a cliff, that's like, okay, this is really easy on the ground to see what it is, where the boundary is. With the new technology and online mapping and whatnot, we're getting a lot of pushback of saying, well, all I have to do is have my phone in my hand and now I know where I'm at. So that's what's kind of changed with these specifically.
So Chad, maybe if we get a little more detailed process going here. So would it be good as you finished, one section of what you're talking about? Are you wanting to hear from each of us that would like to say something, and maybe we could just go down the line and do that? Or are you looking for maybe a motion relative to the topic at hand?
Yeah, if we want to have discussion, if people want to say how they feel, yeah, great. But ultimately, yeah, I am looking for just a recommendation, a motion and a recommendation of how to proceed with this.
That's great. So maybe we should as we finish each one of these. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Justin.
No, real quick. The way I wanted process-wise, what I thought we'd do is just get all the questions to Chad that we wanted to. And I'm okay. We can go back and forth tonight. But once we get all our questions to Chad on this agenda item, we would move it from questions to internal discussion on the committee. And I think that's where we can talk about the things that Chris has brought up as, and generally, do we like this? But we recognize there are going to be some trade-offs and exceptions and times it doesn't work. Or do we just not like this idea at all and we're comfortable with how it is, or that type of stuff? So I think I'd like to get all the questions out to Chad first, and then we'll open it up for all the committee members and talk internally, and then from that point move to a motion. So any additional questions for Chad before we go to internal discussion?
I just had one kind of just idea or thought. So I know with the electronics, we do have the ability to see property lines a little bit easier. If we made those changes, would we then expect everybody to have one of those in their hand versus being able to say, oh yeah, this road's my cutoff? You know what I mean? Would we be running into issues of people saying, well, no, I don't look at a map. I go off of landmarks.
Yeah, and I think that is fair. I've heard arguments that, I think you can buy Onyx subscription for $10 in a month. But there's also, I think, if you didn't download your maps before, you could potentially be in trouble as well. So I think that's a fair consideration and a fair point.
So Chad, on the enforceable identifiable boundary, if the CWMU would still be required to post it properly in accordance with current rule, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It sounds like, Chad, that with the age of Onyx and other apps, that you're getting complaints that maybe are bringing this to the forefront, where people are saying we can get to these public lands, we know where they're located, and since we can access them, we should be able to hunt them, and they shouldn't be part of a CWMU. Is that what's driving you?
Yep. That's what's driving this. And sometimes with Onyx layers too, I think, it'll just show it as a public land and it doesn't show trade lands, but that's probably now I'm falling into the trap that Justin doesn't want us to go into, or I don't, of getting off of topic and going to trade lands. So I regret saying that.
No, don't. I love it. We're going to do it. But I figured if we don't break it up, we're going to talk in circles all night. And then you're all going to blame me for having a really long meeting. So yeah, you. So, well, if there's no other questions for Chad, let's turn it over for committee discussion. How does the committee feel about this?
I think this is, well, prior to showing up, I had the same thoughts that's kind of been expressed already, that with technology, I think it's time to put, kind of put the responsibility back onto the hunter to figure out where they're at on the landscape. However, I think there are situations that need additional consideration. So the way I think about this is, I think I like Chad's approach that if it's public lands, they come out, not meaning that there's not a process to put them back. But then I think it falls back to this, the operator of the CWMU to come before the board or the RAC or whatever that process looks like to justify why, they may need to include those lands and what reasons, so that there's a process that it doesn't just become a rubber stamp, one size fits all, because I don't think it's possible to do that, because every situation is a little different. So to me, I think this makes sense, especially if there's a process where the landowner, the CWMU operator can come back and say, these are the reasons I think we should include this small corner of BLM or state land. So to me, that makes sense to kind of take this approach, as long as there's process for the operator to come back and kind of argue their case as to why they may need to include some of those. But I think as a rule, I think it's the right approach for the public hunters that these come out.
All right, I'll go for a minute. I'm a firm believer and supporter of CWMUs, and I think they're awesome, even though, as a general rule, I'm a public land hunter. I understand how important public land is. I love that opportunity. I would hate it to go away. But I am a very strong believer on this matter, having the Fish and Game work with us and the Wildlife Board, looking at CWMUs on an individual basis. The reason I say that is because people always think that there's some kind of conspiracy going on, and I don't see it that way. I think there is always a good reason for decisions that were made. Some may be better than others, but I have looked at several of the CWMUs in the state that have public lands included. And I've talked to many of the operators over the last several days, and there are some pretty interesting and pretty valuable reasons why public lands are included in some cases. In some cases, if the public lands went away and some of those benefits that the private landowner then, of course, took off the table, it would be a negative to the public hunters in the area. I'm a strong believer that we should look at them individually, but I think as a general rule, it's a good idea to have accessible public lands not generally included. But there are so many different things that go into these CWMUs, and the way I see it, the DWR can make a certain area limited entry, make a certain area general hunting, and another area closed. And we do that all over the place on public lands. CWMUs kind of operate just like a limited entry unit, and I don't see why the DWR can't have the ability to include public lands when it is appropriate and when they're addressing specific concerns. As a general rule, again, across the board, what I have seen, CWMUs always improve the hunting in the general area where they operate for a long period of time. So it's a great benefit to the state, and it's a great benefit to public hunters. I've hunted on the boundaries of a bunch of CWMUs because of this very matter. And so I guess, a strong supporter of looking at them individually and just making sure that it all makes sense and that it's fair.
And I'd like to echo a little something that Greg said. I think you talk about hunting the boundaries. Some of these, like I'm just looking over Eric's shoulder at the Onyx map here of where I can actually see it with my nearsightedness, but you pull out some of these public lands and then it makes a lot of irregular borders, and I like blocking things up myself if there's a commensurate trade-off with other public benefit, where it's easier to control, and there's less surface area, sort of, where you less areas of potential friction and controversy. So I'm always trying to block things up, and but obviously that involves the 5-letter word that we're not going to talk about yet. But I think that the idea that each one of these is so unique. So I don't know you're asking for a general rule and when the exception occurs more than the rule, then it begs the question of whether you want a rule.
Eric, you want to go or can I go?
Yeah, I just, something that occurred to me that I probably should have brought up. I think the difference here, going to Chris's point, is that this process would create transparency, which then eliminates the need for conspiracy theories. Because right now, I think the public hunter generally looks at these maps and they think, well, why have they included that? That's not fair, right? That's land I should have access to. I think with the process where they could actually watch it happen through the rack process, right, creates transparency that they can say, oh, I can see why Ingham Peak has now included this small block of public, and they're also trading with private lands, other places. So I think it would help to reduce some of that uncertainty, which then leads to crazy conspiracy theories, which then plots that EWR is trying to take over the world kind of stuff. So I think this process would help eliminate, even though it may be somewhat onerous, I think it would eliminate some of the conflicts simply because it becomes more transparent to the public as to why those decisions were made.
I in these meetings, I've always felt like the biologists have more information than we do, right? They're on the land and they know the land and they make these recommendations. And it seems like, I've never stepped foot on any of these CWMUs except my own. And so making these general assumptions, I think there is good reason to have public land in CWMUs. I think this is a cooperative effort. And if that sometimes takes some public land to cooperate between private landowners and public hunters and the division, I think there's some value to that. There's obviously a value to a general season public hunter, right? But there's also a value to a limited entry tag and giving limited entry tags. And these landowners who take these lands give more tags to those hunters. And I can think of some really good units that have given up public land recently and now have less public hunters. And so there's an opportunity, I think, on that side of it that needs to be looked at. And I just echo that we need to look at these individually. And I think also, we talk about Onyx and the opportunity to have this Onyx. And I think the CWMU Association feels strongly that the trespass law needs to change if that's the case. If people know where they are and can know where they are, well, why can't they know they're on a CWMU too with their device? And I think there's some value to that as well.
I also believe that looking at them individually makes a lot of sense. I brought up a point on the Northern Region RAC. We were having this discussion about some out in Box Elder County, and several of them looked really egregious in regards to the amount of public land that was encompassed in the CWMUs. And Jim Christensen stood up and kind of clarified some things. There were some really good reasons in those specific cases that they had public lands within them. So looking at these CWMUs in a one-by-one or case-by-case basis, whether it be definable boundaries or, because it made sense or there were agreements with the Division of Wildlife when they started their CWMU, I think having, like, back to Eric's point about transparency, if it was notated why it encompassed public land and why it made sense, I think that puts people at ease if there's a really good reason for it. So I'll just kind of echo what everybody else had said, but I'd like to bring up the discussion about the Box Elder County one because Jim had the history on it and shared that with me, and I felt entirely different after he shared that with me. So just to make the point.
And so on the Central Region RAC where this came up, and it's been really a divisive issue, I took a lot of bullets on this one trying to defend the CWMU program a little bit, because I believe as a general rule, we should exclude public lands from being included in CWMUs. I think there are some times when it makes sense. The reason why we made that motion in the RAC that each CWMU that contains public land should be reviewed by our advisory committee is simple to, has been stated, to bring it out in the open and assess it and see if it really needs to be there. And while I may have never visited that, I would hope to take the input of the biologist and the operator. But also bear in mind that there are a lot of people out there that do not want any public land included in CWMUs. And I'd be remiss if I didn't state that to this committee. I mean, there are a lot of people, we hear it at our RAC. It has been a hot topic. And so I think going forward, we should generally exclude them, but I think that there are times when they can be included. And so that would be kind of the same recommendation that I think pretty much the whole committee feels like.
Would it be inappropriate to have a rule as follows, that upon renewal, or that these CWMUs with, the general rule is that if it's accessible public land, that it shouldn't be included, but on renewal, each of these that have historically had public lands would have to come in before the RAC and make the case, as well as the division employees, as to why it makes sense for public land. That gets to Eric's transparency point. And then you know, if there are compelling reasons that the decision makers still believe, in spite of some public clamor to the contrary, that it makes sense, then it goes forward. And that gives a process on renewal where each of these have to be the hood lifted and inspected, case made.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. And I think this is a really good place. I think what we're running into is, you know, a couple of years ago, I was asked to make sure we review all those with public land in them. And when I brought that back last year through the RAC cycle, it just felt like there wasn't enough time to do it justice in that. And that's why I think we want to bring those here to this board. And we have two of them later on that we're going to hear. We're going to make those decisions on it. But this committee can hear that and free up some of the RAC time. So instead of the RAC trying to go through everyone, like next year, I think there's 20. It's our big renewal year. Instead of them trying to go through 20 CWMUs with public land and trying to figure out if that's justifiable for every one of them to have it, that if we can have a recommendation come from this committee saying, we reviewed it, we find that we recommend that the public land be in or not be in, that it gives more ease to that RAC.
If you say we're going to have a guinea pig or two tonight, has the public been notified that, I mean, I know this agenda is a public meeting and it's probably been properly noticed, but if we're trying to achieve the transparency, the RACs are probably better attended. I don't know, I'm not on a RAC, but will we have sufficient public to weigh in to satisfy the desire to get public input on including in a renewal public lands in a CWMU, like the two we're going to talk about tonight?
Chad, can I tackle that one? That's a really good question, and we've spoken about that internally. This committee, in some ways, is an extension of the Wildlife Board in the sense that they formed this committee through the rule, the CWMU rule, and it was specifically to hear the issues that Kobe brought up in the charter and different things like that. We felt like if we had a public process here with questions and answers and comments and those types of things, then we'd be duplicating that process when they went to the RACs and the boards. And so for us, with this committee, I think the bulk of what you're going to see is complaints or recommendations from Chad or whatever issue is at hand. Obviously, opportunities to hear from operators and those types of things, and then this committee. And then we bring that recommendation back to our director and the Wildlife Board jointly. And then at that point, that's where the public process of comment and questions and those things comes in. And so that's, if it feels a little different than a RAC meeting, it's by design.
The Wildlife Board has the patience to go into the weeds to that degree?
We have, yeah. I mean, there have been times where they've had to hear variances, and it's been an agenda item, and it's taken a lot of time. And I will say this, they've weighed pretty heavily on what this committee has recommended.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. I like the idea of having Chad and others come up and say, discuss the complaints, the issues about which they know, then have the operator come in, you get a recommendation from us and then we pass it off. That seems to make sense. On renewal, I mean, as they start coming up for renewal, maybe we'll be meeting twice a month here. Should meet in Park City sometime. It's very nice at certain seasons.
Just real quick, I want to just summarize what I've heard from this committee, and then if there's anything else to add, let's add it and make a motion and jump on to the next one, because we've got a lot to get through. What I've heard, and it's not everything, but a summary, is as a general rule, accessible public lands should be excluded unless they can provide and demonstrate a real public benefit. There are times that including accessible public land into a CWMU will make sense. Some like the ability to block up public lands for hunting. This process could add transparency in what we're doing with CWMUs in regards to public lands. Biologists know the areas well. They need to work with the landowners on these issues and to show the benefits. There's a need to look at these CWMUs individually. And I think, Chad, thanks for bringing that up, that everyone that has public land is going to come before this committee. I think that's a very important point. There's value in having CWMUs with public lands go before this committee and be reviewed upon renewal. Was there anything else that we wanted to add to that, or are we ready for a motion? You're looking like you got something to say. Was it covered, or?
I'm going to add one thing real fast. We haven't really addressed the matter of enforceable and identifiable boundaries. So let me give you a surveyor's perspective on it. The way that the current laws are in Utah, our current trespass laws, it enforces the reason that the DWR has this in the rule, to have an enforceable and identifiable boundary. And the reason why is because to the layperson likes to see monuments, ridges, fence lines, something to tell them where a boundary is. So our current trespass laws, it supports including public lands for that reason into the CWMU. If our laws were more along the lines of, let's say, Wyoming, where you just better know where you are, then it makes it less of an argument for us to say we're using this as an enforceable, identifiable boundary. We currently have some great apps and online resources and mapping to help us as hunters, and we are getting much better at it and getting around these things. But from a land surveyor's perspective on it, the way our current state laws are gives certainly some credence to the CWMUs, including these, to enforce and identify their boundaries, because typically that's how the layperson not trained in surveying identifies where a boundary would be.
That's a good point. Thank you. I'm ready for a motion.
I thought you summarized it well. If I could just say, I move that we accept Justin's summary, I will do so.
That is quite the summary. There was quite a bit there. Do you want me to try to, well, I'm the chair. I can't make motions, so I think I'll need one of you guys to make a motion.
Do you have those notes in front of you? I thought you stated it well.
The motion wouldn't have to be that complex. All the motion really has to do is, as a committee, do we agree that the public lands included in CWMU, or generally accessible lands, should be excluded unless, brought to the board in the rack, et cetera, to justify inclusion. I think that's as simple as the motion actually has to be. All of Justin's other stuff is kind of ancillary to that, but the actual motion would be pretty straightforward.
Well, the parts of what Justin summarized that I thought needed to be in the motion are that the general rule is they're excluded, but there's an opportunity to demonstrate why it's important to include them, and that there would be a review of the existing CWMUs that have public lands within at the time of renewal by this, review by this advisory board.
So,
Chris, so how about if I make a motion and I'll read it?
Thank you.
You can second it. How's that sound?
That sounds terrific.
Sound good? All right, so I want to make a motion that related to the enforceable and identifiable boundary issue with including public lands and CWMUs. That as a general rule, accessible public lands should be excluded unless they can provide and demonstrate a public benefit. And there are times that including accessible public land in the CWMU will make sense. And we should always attempt to provide transparency in the public process anytime that public land is included in a CWMU. And we should rely on the biologists and their input as we are making those decisions individually. And that we should continue to review those CWMUs that are including public lands with the advisory committee. And then finally, that the reason that these lands are included, they do help to enforce and identify a boundary, because in many cases, in most cases, public hunters like to see clear boundaries. It makes it easier to manage the trespass issues and the trespass laws in the state of Utah.
okay, we have a motion by Greg. We have a second.
I probably couldn't support that motion with the last sentence. Because I think that we need to try to get away from that, kind of that reasoning a little bit more. There's an onus on the CWMU to post their land. I mean, it's what's found within the rule that they have to, of how they have to have their property posted, and I think that actually is more entailed than the regular trespass laws, is it not? Is it still in the CWMU rule that they have to have it posted within like every so often?
Yeah, in the CWMU rule, if it's public land that you're posting, it's every 300 yards. If it is just your regular boundary, it's at corners, stream crossings, gates, and roads.
So it's the same on the, okay. So it would be the same on the, as the trespass law for their own private property.
So Mike, the sentence that you found offensive was the one that said something like, the reason we might include these lands is because we want an identifiable and enforceable boundary. And I think the earlier parts of his motion discussed that the reason to include them is there's a public benefit, and that's the driving factor, not the boundary and enforceable and identified boundary.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that there couldn't be a public benefit in that. I just don't like that.
It's covered by the public benefit.
Yeah, I just don't like that that's called out as its own specific.
So Greg, would you, I don't know if you caught what we said, but the reason to include the public lands is a public benefit, which could include an enforceable and identifiable boundary. So that last sentence is probably not essential. And it sounds like if at least I'm happy to second it either way, but I think it would probably be better to delete the last one.
All right, so I agree with the amendment to the motion.
Okay, and I've seconded the motion as amended.
Okay, very good. So we have a motion by Greg, a second by Chris. There's an amendment to the motion to delete that last sentence that talks about clear and enforceable boundaries. Everybody clear on the motion? Okay, let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Alicia, are you still online with us?
Yes, I am. I got the motion written down.
Okay. Well, I am so glad that we're breaking these up into 4 sections, because if we had that plus the other 3, that would be an extremely long motion. So I think we're good to move on to the next part of this. Chad, the next part that you had on your PowerPoint was dealing with non-accessible public lands. So these are public lands that are within a CWMU that the public doesn't have access to. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Did we want to talk about the management ones that are accessible? Or is that lumped into, did we want to break that out? Because that's,
I think that covered it. I mean, accessible, whether it's on the border or whether there's a county road that gets you there, accessible is accessible. And I think we're good to move on to inaccessible, unless the committee feels otherwise. Okay, let's move on to inaccessible.
okay, so inaccessible, we have the 2 types. We probably want to break these up into the 2 different ones. So the completely surrounded by one or multiple CWMUs, I think that one, for us, we don't have a problem of the public land staying in those. I mean, there's no other access to them, and even by private landowners. Don't know that we feel super strongly about the second one, honestly, of if it's completely surrounded by private land, I can see some benefit for it to be in the CWMU, but I also see benefit for it not being in the CWMU. Potentially a benefit for it to be in the CWMU is, we know CWMUs have a public hunter that goes through a public draw that would have access to that land. With it being out, there's times where private landowners will allow people to access that public land through their private land. So potentially could have public hunters on it that way as well. So I don't know that we feel super strong on this one either way.
Who decides, so when it's, okay, so we've got a parcel of public land and it's bordered on by 2 CWMUs. Who decides which CWMU gets that land in their own CWMU?
I think Sydney does. A lot of times it's just worked out between the landowners. So
Do you really believe that? Or is it just whoever claimed it first, whoever stuck their stake in the ground first?
there could be that, but we had one that just divided, a CWMU that divided into 2 different ones, and one CWMU took one chunk of public land, the other one took the other chunk. So I think there are some landowners that will work together. I think for sure you have others that I know of a different one where there was a fight and it ended up that, so I don't know, they came to consensus. So I told the biologists to work it out, and they did. So
The second bullet, surrounded by private land, I mean, it's the same as this first bullet, except that private land in the second bullet is not in a CWMU, right? So then it must be at least adjacent to a CWMU in some fashion. The public land must be, or we wouldn't be talking about it. So one or more boundaries of it are adjacent to lands in a CWMU, but then one or more boundaries of it are adjacent to non-CWMU private lands.
yeah, so let's look at this one. So we're just that we're all clear. So this is White's Valley. You have the BLM that's inside the public land. But this is not a CWMU over here. It's a different private landowner. So do we want that to be in the CWMU, or do we want it to be out?
I mean, that's the thing, the Fish and Game is going to be deciding who gets to hunt it, that one property owner or the other property owner. And I don't see why this, just like in others that we've talked about, that a biologist can't just help make a decision. I mean, not all CWMU operators want to have public land in their CWMUs. Everyone always talks about, hey, they're getting more land, they're getting more land, they want it. They don't always want it, because they pretty much always have to give something for it. And what they're giving is very valuable. So don't just, people that are maybe listening online, don't always think that CWMUs definitely want it and they can't wait to have it, because they don't always want it. They know they're going to create a good benefit to wildlife in that area. And if they have to give another very expensive deer or elk tag because of having the public land in, then they're not always going to want to do it. But, in a case like this, unfortunately, the DWR is stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I don't know, it'd be nice just to look at it on an individual basis and get the biologist's feedback on it and see how you would like the wildlife population controlled there.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to interrupt. If we could have Chad do that illustration again, we were unable to convey that to those watching online. We're now ready to have you point at the map again.
So I have to do a replay?
Replay.
Okay. We'll try to do it word for word.
Hey, a lot of people don't get a second chance in life, Chad. So this is, you got
I feel like I've had more than one. So we have the public land that's inside the CWMU, but this is other private land that's not a CWMU. So the question is whether you keep that in the CWMU or let it be accessible to this other private landowner.
For me, I think in this situation, the public only gets the benefit if it's in the CWMU, right? Through a public tag. I mean, the public will get access by having a CWMU tag. If it's the other landowner, they would not. It's my thought.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say guaranteed. So that other private landowner, we don't know who they are, what their thoughts are. So they might allow access, they might not. So the guarantee is through the public or through the CWMU.
That's my thoughts on it as well. As a public land hunter, I look at it and think that's my only opportunity to get on that piece if that's where I want it to be.
So when I served on this committee prior in a previous life, a long time ago, we actually heard we had multiple complaints come to the committee of adjoining landowners to public lands, which were then included in CWMUs. And they made some compelling arguments, because it might not just be one landowner that borders on that mile stretch. It could be 5 landowners. And those 5 landowners could draw a tag for the northern region, or for a box elder tag. And then that could be part of the land that they could hunt. So maybe are they a public land hunter if they're hunting on public land? I mean, it cuts both ways a little bit. And so I do struggle with this one a little bit more than maybe I should. And like was stated earlier, not every CWMU operator wants public land included in their CWMU, but many want the good public land included in their CWMU. Or they wouldn't include it, because Whites Valley could run that line around that BLM and not include it if they didn't want to. It looks like there's some pretty good draws there. Tim, could you expound on that?
Yeah, I can tell you everything outside of that line is a fallow dry farm, right? For the most part. I mean, that's a valid point. It really is. But I just think for those private landowners who own thousands of acres right there, I know them, that they have an opportunity to hunt in their fields, And I just feel like, and it's the same thing. This is a case by case, right? I mean, it's no different than the last thing we talked about in my mind, is we need to look at these case by case, but maybe not. I mean, I think the opportunity lies in the CWMU personally, and not on the other, but that's just me.
I was just going to say that it seems, just as Tim said, that maybe this category should be in the other, treated similar to the motion we just looked at, as if someone wants to include, an operator wants to include public lands that are not landlocked, they'd make a justification. I mean, the reason, if this were my CWMU, I don't like, this adds another 50 to 75% of additional border that I have to deal with, where people are often camped out along my borders you know, and maybe that's a selfish thing to say, but you know, so having that be a square line to me is a benefit. I told you I like things blocked up. That may not be a compelling reason. Maybe the dry farmers don't care, you know, but maybe they do care, you know, it's in a different scenario. So having the transparency around why we included that, you know, I as an operator, if that were mine, would say, I want a straight line there. It makes it easy. It's less opportunity for somebody to not get the boundary right. It's a block. Blocks are better. That's in my values. Blocks are better. But there may be really good reason that those neighbors want, that's the only place they can hunt, and they make a compelling case, and it gets pulled out. But it would be done on a similar basis to the other categories of the accessible and the you know, the two we just ruled on.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I kind of side with Tim. I mean, the only way I would have access to that as a public hunter is if it's in the CWMU. I understand there could be other landowners on that outside who, to your point, might draw that tag or be able to hunt their property. But from a selfish standpoint, I don't really care. I mean, yeah, they get access to that public land that I wouldn't have access to just because their land borders it. But I would rather have the opportunity for myself or other people in the state who might not be in that family who has that access. So I'd rather have it in the CWMU if the CWMU wanted to have it included.
A little bit of a contrary point. I think this is almost the exact opposite of the accessible lands we just talked about. To me, because they can change their tag split by not including public land that's completely, let's just talk about just public or a piece of public that's surrounded by the CWMU. I think it's almost compelling that they should have to include it unless they can justify why it's not, because it messes with their split, right? If they include that public land, it would provide more potential opportunity for public access for that piece, where if they exclude it, they don't have to give as many public tags, and that piece of public is now completely inaccessible to anybody else. So I think we could almost go the other direction. If it's completely surrounded by a CWMU, I think the CWMU should be compelled to include it in their CWMU acreage unless they can justify why it's not a good idea for a public benefit. Because I think this is for example, they could say, okay, we're not going to include a landlocked piece that's within the CWMU. We're not going to include it. It changes that public split, but it's still not accessible to the public. So the public's not deriving any benefit from that public land that's effectively still being taken off the table from the public hunter. So I almost think it's the converse here, that if the CWMU encompasses public land, it should be included unless they can justify why it should not.
If I can, I'd like to make one more point as well. Well, I don't know where we're at in this, because we were doing questions and then we've just made a bunch of comments. So hold on, let me back up. Do we have any more questions for Chad on landlocked CWMUs that are either completely engulfed in a CWMU or that border this way? Or I guess, Kobe, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could make one comment, if that's okay. And this is kind of along the lines of what Mr. Christensen was saying. And we're making some assumptions about this piece of public inside the CWMU. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong here, but the assumptions we're making is that if it's in the CWMU, obviously guaranteed public tag, or that's wrong, guaranteed public benefit of some sort. And that's a good thing. Couldn't agree more. What we're not addressing is that it's more complex than that, right? Because we go in the CWMU, it's going to have a different management strategy than outside of the CWMU. We don't know how the property outside of the CWMU is posted. So if we're talking about rangeland that borders a CWMU outside, and this is one of the reasons why, as is in the previous motion, we have to evaluate these independently. If we're talking about rangeland outside the CWMU, it may be posted, it may not be posted. But if it's deer, it's probably going to be managed as general season, which means that the tag allocation and the way that piece is managed is very different. So the public benefit may be 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 15 permits going to the public as opposed to how that limited entry CWMU is managed. And I think that's the point that Mike was trying to make. And so what I'm trying to say is there's not a right, there's not a wrong, but we're talking about two different management strategies, and it may actually offer more public benefit not being in the CWMU. It may be more public benefit to private landowners, but there is no right or wrong in this. It's just different. And so you have to look at it that way too. And I guess what I'm saying is that land on the edge of a CWMU, even when it borders private land, is different than land that's fully encompassed by a CWMU. And I just want to make sure the committee can make that distinction.
Good point. Go ahead, Tim.
Just one comment. I think,
Well, hold on, before you make that. Let's move this to comments, because I think we need to move this along anyways. So Tim, go ahead and we'll just go
my
comments.
comment on this, my position would be to let the biologist just make a recommendation. I don't know if it needs to come before us to do this. I just think let the biologist during the renewal process make a determination. It would be my idea on this type of inclusion or exclusion.
I can agree with that as long as it's on a border like the example that's here on the board. If it's on the border, then I think I'm completely fine letting the biologist kind of make a call as to what the best public benefit is. But if that public section is entirely encompassed by a CWMU, then I think we should go the other way and compel them to include it unless they can justify why it should not be included.
Just knowing private landowners like I do, that's going to be a little sticky because you're telling them what, I mean, that's just, these are big ranchers and there's some that, I've known some that have bought a ranch and they'll buy out their CRP contract so they don't have to deal with the government, right? And then that owner is a CWMU, that it's a CWMU, right? So telling someone that they have to might get a little sticky,
Then he
in
doesn't
my
have,
opinion.
then he doesn't have to be a member of the CWMU. I mean, that's a choice. Like I think Eric makes it a great point that I never thought of. So if you had 640 acres right smack dab in the center of that, it's going to be managed pretty much along the lines of as a CWMU for whatever they're managing their herd at, and they should be forced to include that, because if it's a limited entry unit, then it's a limited entry unit. I would tend to agree with Eric on it.
So I suppose the question is, say they don't want to, as Tim said, now there's this island out there. It's not likely to be enforced. It could be hunted upon very easily by the CWMU and its clientele. And I don't know what the costs are in the public split. If you have an acre of public versus a section and 1% or 20% or 50%, there's probably big impact as you get higher in percent public land. But I tend to agree with Eric on the included acreages, but on the boundary, I'm fine, I guess, with the biologist just doing it, but in the spirit of transparency, there may be instances where you want to have it go through more of a process. And another quick point is, we've assumed that there isn't a public easement to that piece that would allow what Covey said, where there could be, 5, 10, 15 times more public hunting opportunity on that 320 that's public land. We're assuming that it has no access other than through the good graces of the surrounding private landowner, but sometimes that's not the case. That would be part of the facts and circumstances that would be looked at in determining whether to include it or not, I assume.
I'd like to make one point if that's okay, and then Eric, go to you. I think one thing that's we've heard before, I think all of us have heard it, is sometimes with CWMUs, when there's only one permit offered, it's really hard to draw that permit. And we've heard it time and time again that we'd hope that there would be at least 2 permits, so that way a max point person can hunt that CWMU. And when you have public land enrolled, there is a benefit because you get that additional tag. But the other thing that I think is missed in some of this conversation is now max point holders can plan a little better to obtain that tag. And that's a big deal. I mean, Chad and I hear that quite regularly, that we ought to have a program where max point holders can get that. And so that's just another added benefit if the committee chose to include it. So
Just for kind of an example, back to Tim's point, and this is my grazing side coming out, but what we're talking about is exactly how grazing on a public-private checkerboard works. So if you have a piece of private surrounded by public, you default to public management and you swap AUMs, right? So depending on how big your piece of private is, the BLM will credit you so many AUMs and vice versa. So this actually is pretty reflective, meaning most landowners would be somewhat familiar with that swap. I just think there's a benefit to that. If it's not included in the CWMU, there's a benefit to the landowner, and then the public's not receiving any benefit back from that, because they could hold that and hunt it with a general tag, right? All by themselves, or they could, as Chris suggested, and I don't know if people would actually do that, but there's no way of enforcing whether they're hunting that as part of the CWMU and just not including it either. I don't have any barometers to whether that happens, but I think there's a benefit to the CWMU for that public piece, and so I think there should be benefit back to the public as well.
I think it goes back to earlier discussions as well, as not every piece of property is equal, right? And so that's why I like the biologist determining this. I mean, I think, is there animals on that piece or not? I mean, that would give us a better idea of value, I think.
I agree, Tim, that the biologists should be giving their input and telling the public system if it's a good CWMU, if how this would work best. But I also share a little bit like putting it all on the biologist to make that decision. That's why I think it's good that if it came maybe before our committee or through the RAC process in some way, to take it maybe all of the burden off the biologist.
That's what I stood up to say is I think I think you're right, Mike, I think our biologists can come up with recommendations. They can work with CWMUs, they can work with the private landowners that surround it, and we can come up with a recommendation. However, as stated, one of the first things in the presentation is it's required by code that CWMUs with public lands get brought before the RAC and board. So I think skipping this process and just saying whatever the biologist decides, I think would be a mistake, and we need to hear that.
How controversial is this, I guess, is my point. Like, how often is this? I mean, Mike, you're on a RAC. How often does this specific come up? You talked about it once, but I'm just curious how, and maybe division as well, Chad.
So in our RAC, it's come up multiple times in the last 3 years, each year. I mean, it's gone, I don't know, go through the minutes, maybe like 4 to 6 times. It's been a really divisive thing.
Specifically, though, about this landlocked private public.
Oh,
how controversial
specifically
is that?
About that, yes. Like it is, like there are a lot of people out there that want no public land included in the CWMU, like zero. Doesn't matter if it's landlocked. And then, like I say, previously, we had, I think it was 2, maybe 3 complaints from adjacent landowners that were frustrated that the land that they own, or they owned land alongside of BLM, and they had hunted it for generations. And then the CWMU comes along and puts that BLM land into their CWMU and cuts them out. Now, that's a pretty hard pill for somebody to swallow. And when we talk about public-private, access, however we want to work that, those men or those hunters were obtaining their permits through the public draw. So if we displace those hunters off of that public land, they're going to have to go to some other land. And I mean, it has wider ranging consequences than we could probably think out as we sit here at these tables tonight. But but it's often that it comes up in our rack.
Yeah, Tim, real quick on the last, correct me if I'm wrong, Chad or Mike, but at the last one, the motion at the Central Region RAC was to remove all public land across the board from every CWMU. And it was a split vote and the chair had to split the vote. I mean, that's how much momentum it's getting, but that's, Northern Region has similar comments come up, although I don't think it went to that extreme. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it's a hot topic in 2 of the racks.
Most of that discussion revolved around implementing a 3-year process of evaluating each CWMU and determining the amount of public land encompassed within the boundaries of the CWMU. So that at the end of our rack, that was the discussion, was to, because the CORs come up periodically and not all at once, but it would take us 3 years to get through this process.
Well, let me summarize what I've heard, and then if we need to add more, let's do it, and if not, let's make a motion, because we still got a bunch to get to. So for the sake of time, what I've heard, and again, don't just make this a motion, like write your own notes and figure it out. But what I heard, to summarize, is if a public land is on a border of other private land that's not enrolled in the CWMU, we should let the biologist make a determination if it should be included or not. If a public section is landlocked, it should be included in the CWMU to provide a better public benefit. That was captured. Some CWMUs don't want public land enrolled in the program. There may be a public easement to that public land on the border that we're unaware of. An additional point could allow for max bonus points to be used. Public land along a border of a CWMU should be brought before this committee, and this is heavily discussed at our racks. So any other comments that we want to make before we entertain a motion?
Some of the points you made are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Either the biologist decides, or we bring it before this body or the RAC to decide.
Well, just to clarify, these were the points that you guys made.
No, I understand.
I'm joking.
But your motion can't stand.
Yeah,
It's got
thank goodness.
internal inconsistencies.
So I think we can sum this one up a little bit simpler than the last one. So I would make a motion that, kind of a 2-part motion. So if public land is on the border of a CWMU, I still think there's value to having the biologist make a recommendation and it come to the board simply for transparency.
To this committee?
Yeah, to this committee. Secondarily, if the land is landlocked, I think the CWMU should be compelled to include it. And in both cases, there's a process to, that the CWMU could be heard to exclude or or provide a variance from the recommendations. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I think I've captured it. That we have a motion. Any discussion on the motion?
If you changed compelled to encouraged, I'd be all in.
What's that?
Isn't this another example of a general rule with the process for exceptions? So rather than say compelled, maybe the general rule is that it's included, the landlocked parcels, unless there's countervailing compelling reasons, unless there's other reasons why it should be excluded, and the operator would have the opportunity to make that case, just as they would to include or exclude the public lands on the boundary.
So Eric, based on what you've heard, do you want to stay with your motion or do you want to amend it?
I think we could amend it. I'm not okay with the encourage, because I think we've provided an opportunity for the CWMU to get a variance from including that public section, but they'd have to come before the committee to debate that, right? Or to provide evidence why it should not be included. So, but I do think Chris's point is that we could probably even knock out compelled and just say landlocked, public lands locked with inside the CWMU should be included unless compelling evidence is brought before the committee to create a variance.
Can I just make one point? I'm sorry, I should have brought this up earlier. But I think these are limited entry units, and they're in these limited entry units in the state. There's a lot of private landowners, Mike, you were one, where it's included, right? There's no choice. I just think, I don't know if that's the best, like that we are including these. I think there should be some sort of discussion on it, that it is encouraged, compelled.
I think the word generally included, that gives a guideline, doesn't it?
But let's do this. Why don't you restate your motion? So that way we're clear, and then we'll talk about getting a second.
Okay, give me just a second.
Yep.
So just really quick to Tim, I think, again, we're providing the CWMU an opportunity to separate themselves from that public land. So I don't think we're forcing anybody in any corner here. So make a motion that in the case of public lands that are on the border of a CWMU, we would recommend that the biologist makes a recommendation, and then that comes before the board to be heard. If the land is entirely landlocked within a particular CWMU, generally it should be included in the CWMU, but a process will be in place to allow for variance to exclude it as that's brought to the board.
And by board, you mean CWMU Advisory Committee?
Yes, the CWMU Advisory Board.
Okay. Everybody clear on the motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Eric, second by Clint. I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say aye. Aye. We got one opposed, Tim. Tim, you want to talk about the opposition, just so it's in the notes?
Yeah, I just feel that a landowner should have a choice if they're going to include it in a unit that they're running.
Okay. Alicia, let me check with you. Did you capture all that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. How are we doing? We've been at it for about an hour 45. Do we need a 5-minute break, or are we good to get through Chad's? What's that? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So.
Alicia, if we could do a quick audio check, we're going to return in about 15 seconds.
Hear you loud and clear.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have the trade lands. So, Chad, do you just want to talk to us real quick about trade lands and what we're thinking, what the division's thinking there?
Yeah, so trade lands, and after, I guess maybe my thoughts have changed a little bit after being in this.
Chad, real quick, sorry. For those that are watching either tonight or going to watch later on YouTube, can you explain exactly what a trade land is?
Yeah. So trade lands are, if they have public land included in the CWMU, they will trade access to private lands that they own that are not in the CWMU. Sometimes they don't even touch. Sometimes they're close, fairly close, but sometimes they're not even real close. But they trade those out. So they open those up for access to the public to hunt at least that species that they have, that they're enrolled with in the CWMU. And this one, after hearing the discussion on the last two, I almost feel like we might just end up in the same spot. Maybe I shouldn't say that and already tell you where you're going to end up. But a lot of it seems like it's a case by case basis. So we have trade lands like we talked earlier that open up access to other public land. We talked a little bit about Causey Springs, and we don't know 100% if that's the case, but like Rabbit Creek does do that for sure. And there's probably some others out there. We have had a really hard time letting people know what those trade lands are. I'd even say, I've had division employees say, well, we need to put those trade lands on the map. And I say, it is on the map. And so we have to go in there. But I don't know if it's like a separate map or not. But point being is it's not super well known, and people don't know how to access what those trade lands are, and probably on the ground as well. Like we've talked somewhat about Onyx and other online things. I don't know that they have our trade lands layer. So it's just, that part of it seems a little bit hard of justifying, well, if nobody knows where any of the trade lands are, why are we doing this? Talked a little bit earlier too, that sometimes these trade lands are potentially never were posted and always had been hunted, but now it's a trade, so there's not a public benefit. So to me, this one's another hard one where I think we need to make sure that the trade lands make sense, that there is a public benefit. And one of the things I talked about too is whether that includes at least one public tag every 3 years or every year included with the trade lands, if that makes it more of a public benefit in case it is one of those scenarios.
So Chad, real quick, what are you hoping to get tonight from this committee as it relates to trade lands? I think the first two were pretty easy on accessible lands, inaccessible lands, and those things. Are you hoping to have more of a conversation about the pros and cons of trade lands, or are you looking, because rule allows it, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, it's there. You just, is the idea behind this just more, what are you looking for from this committee, I guess?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear discussion or questions or thoughts or just ideas on ways that we can make this better. Or, I mean, if there is opposition of saying we don't want trade lands, that we hear that as well. But just kind of get some feedback. And I don't know if if the committee wants to make a motion on what to do with it, I think that's fine. But if there's not a motion, I think as long as the discussion there, that we're fine. Maybe I'm speaking out of my turn. Maybe that's your job to determine.
No, that's fine. I just, I mean, on the other ones, you had some clear direction on, we kind of support this, we don't support that. With trained lands, is there any direction from the division on this committee on, or is this just more of a, hey, we have trade lands, it needs to be part of the discussion, here's some of the pros, here's some of the cons?
Yeah.
From the division standpoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, well, with that, let's go questions from the committee to Chad.
I certainly think it would be worthwhile, our committee possibly making a motion on this matter, just because trade lands are an awesome thing, and but they probably are also controversial. I think, if when we do discuss a motion in a little bit here, we should be talking about the things that are controversial. Number one, we should keep trying to find ways to get that out there. It's definitely on the hunt planner. I've looked at a bunch of them today, and there's some really cool properties in trade lands. And Utah, DWR, we're not any different than some of the other states. There are walk-in areas in other states that are awesome. I've researched them, I've used them, I've hunted them. They're awesome. And it does take the public hunter, the guy like myself, to go out there and find it, track it down, and get on and hunt it. And so, it should be posted. Maybe we should talk a little bit about it being posted and continuing to be put on the hunt planner so people can plan around that and utilize it. But trade lands can be awesome. So what's controversial about it? Well, I would say that probably folks that are in the camp of I don't want any public lands in a CWMU, they probably think that, or they've probably seen where there are trade lands that don't seem that they are commensurate with what public land was taken to be put in the CWMU. And so, something that we talk about from a motion perspective should be talking about, let's have the biologists analyze these trade lands and make sure that if there is a trade, that it's a fair trade.
I just have a comment. I think it would be, why don't we just label these as walk-in access? I mean, I think people go in to that site and look at that and use those opportunities. And I mean, that would be my thought of at least getting the word out and it not being so as hidden. Just a thought. I don't know if we can do that.
I would agree with that, team.
I like that because that's people looking for places for private lands. We'd probably want to make sure we make differentiate it because we pay for walk-in access and trade lands we don't. But
And maybe it's not walk-in access, right? Because maybe is it accessible by vehicle, but I don't know, some umbrella of that advertising wise, I think I'd work.
Advertise it on the same page.
Go ahead.
Chad, I just have a quick question. And maybe this is part of the Tim and others that are involved in the CWMUs. When we talk to operators about trade lands and say they have a deer CWMU, are they under the impression that trade land is deer for deer? Or are they under the impression that if they engulf a bunch of public land in their CWMU, the trade lands they offer up are for everything? I mean, I'm talking dove hunting, rabbit hunting, deer hunting, all those types of things. I just want to make sure I understand exactly what's being discussed before people go into trade lands.
I think it's reasonable to include all wildlife. I don't, personally, I've never talked to anyone about that personally, Justin, so I wouldn't, as far as that goes, but I just think if you're trading it, and there's a wildlife opportunity, maybe that's part of it, right? Maybe that's part of what the private landowner gives is you can hunt chukars and birds and all that too.
Yeah, and it seems to me that it probably needs to be for all big game species minimum. Like it wouldn't really make sense to have it, like a lot of those seasons overlap. So somebody's hunting deer and somebody's hunting elk. It's a deer CWMU, but you're saying, oh, you can't, I don't know. It just makes more sense to me that it would be.
Well, the reason I ask is because if that public land were available to the public, they could go do all those activities on that CWMU. And so if there's a trade land associated with it, is that the benefit they get? And I don't know if I have a clear answer on it. So.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was just looking at Ingham Peak on Onyx, and there appear to be on the southern end of it some red stippled dots on some checkerboard sections that appear to be different than the light blue stippled dots that indicate a CWMU. I wonder if there, this is just one example of an app, but it seems like, I don't see a legend, so I don't know if it's really trade lands. But there is some distinction here, and they look like logically where you would do some trade lands where it's checkerboarded on your south end, coming down to Rocky Pass. So there, it seems like, and some of these apps I've had to call Onyx, and I've talked to you, Chad, when I didn't think they were representing my property right, and then turns out that the maps that, we had a few kinks in the system, but we can't rely on them, but I don't think for everything, but there is probably a way to come up with a different category, different from walk-in access, that would be, trade lands.
Yeah, and even potentially that's something we could reach out to Onyx and share as well. I'm not really big in that world, so I don't know how it all works, but you would think that would be something we could get to them.
So along Justin's lines, I just want to make sure that when we trade public lands for private access lands, that we still are under the understanding that the CWMU can only use those public lands for the species that they are authorized to hunt. They could the public can still hunt doves and rabbits on public lands included in a CWMU. So and then I think Tim makes a great point that maybe we don't call it CWMU trade lands. We call it, I'm not a marketing genius, so there's got to be a better terminology out there that describes it as available for public hunters to access. And I also feel like that there should be some kind of signage to declare it as such. Like Wyoming, their hunter management units or their walk-in access areas, there's signage that tells you that. And there's, like, if there are roads that are open, there's a map. And hey, maybe the biologists could put all this together for us. See, yeah, they're still awake over there. So, but there should be some more information. We need to disseminate it better. So,
I agree that signs on the ground too, I think only helps CWMUs and helps people understand, like, this is a benefit from the CWMU, that they might have even have been using it in the past and not even realized that that's what they were benefiting from a CWMU opening up land. So,
Any other questions for Chad, or should we move this on to internal discussion? Okay, let's do that.
I need to clarify, Onyx is calling that red stippled as walk-in access. I don't know if you have walk-in access? Okay, then that's not trade ground anyway. I stand corrected.
Let me just summarize what I have from our discussion, and then if we need to add to it, let's do it. There's an idea with trade lands that it seems to be similar to the other things we've discussed tonight on a case-by-case basis with each CWMU. The DWR can do a better job advertising trade lands to show the benefits to public hunters. Trade lands need to be better posted in the field and on Onyx maps. Trade lands need to be a fair trade and do away with the perceptions or the realities that you're getting better lands at the expense of lesser lands. And then finally, a question maybe back to the division. I don't know if we have a good answer tonight, but can trade lands be enrolled in walk-in access? So that's where we're at with the comments. Oh,
I think the answer to the trade lands being in walk-in access, the answer is no.
okay.
But yeah, because we pay for walk-in access, and it would kind of make it not be a trade land anymore. I think if we can post those trade lands in the same spot that we do walk-in access, and so people that are looking for public land or private land that they can access, they can see it all on one page, would be my thought.
Thanks for that clarification.
Justin, in your notes, did you get, I might have missed it, but did you get that we feel like that the trade land should be open for the hunting of multiple species?
No, I need to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, all species.
I think I was talking instead of typing. So yes, thanks for reminding me of that. Okay, well, if there's no other discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
I think I wrote it down if you want me to make it, guys. Okay, I'll try it. All right, in regards to trade lands, I want to make a motion that in regards to trade lands, they be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. That first, that the biologists analyze the fairness of the trade, and that the advisory committee have the opportunity to review that along with other public lands related to that CWMU, specifically to the fairness of the trade. That the trade lands be posted properly with signage that is clear and detailed, that it can be accessed and hunted. That the DWR analyze better methods to advertise the use of the trade lands, and that the trade lands be considered for the opportunity for the public to hunt multiple species.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion in the second? Not, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. Passes. Alicia, did you capture all that?
I did. Who gave the second? I did miss that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that you, Mike? What? What? It was you, Mike. Okay. Sorry, Greg made the motion. Mike did the second.
Okay, thank you.
Mike Christensen, yeah, Mike Lauder doesn't want to be associated with that in any form or fashion. I'm just kidding. Yeah, Mike Christensen. So. Okay, next up on this, we have just some potential impacts of removing public land. And so Chad, I'll give you a couple minutes to summarize that and we'll go into questions.
Yeah, I really think I had another slide on this and it disappeared when I was doing something, but I'll just go back to this when it covers it anyway. But so with some of these decisions, there's potential in the future that if our determination as we go through each one individually, that we might make a recommendation that public land gets taken out of a CWMU. And by doing so, it might split that CWMU in two, and it may not qualify to be a CWMU for contiguous acres under the contiguous acres rule. And so I'd like to have, as a division, I think we can support those continuing on to be CWMUs, whether it makes them under acreage, if we have to allow a variance for it to be under acreage or non-contiguous. I think we could support that. It would be something that we would want to monitor going forward and really pay close attention to satisfaction ratings to see if taking that public land out really dropped their satisfaction ratings over time, that maybe it was relying on that public land. That, I guess that's the thoughts from the division side, so.
Okay, thank you, Chad. Any questions for Chad?
Are you saying that there were additional objectives on a previous page that are unrelated to what you have here?
No, it was, I thought I had another slide that talked about this, but.
Okay.
But
is it true that when the last bullet of old versus new, is it possible that some old CWMUs failed to meet the private land acreage count, and that by pulling out that they've relied upon public lands to reach the 5 or 10,000 acre thresholds? Or is that wouldn't have happened in the past?
No, we currently have 2 CWMUs don't even have 5,000 private acres in them. So
Okay.
there are some that are that way. There's others that, I don't know if I'm supposed to name names, but it'll come out eventually. But if you looked at Old Woman on a map, there's like 3 different chunks, and one of them has a significant amount of public land in it. And that's one that's been around for, I think, the inception of the program.
Well, that's how she got old. But what I'm wondering is, are you suggesting that going forward, if somebody brought forth a CWMU that didn't meet the acreage criteria on private land only, they'd be denied?
Yeah.
So there may be some grandfathered or grandmothered, in this case, CWMUs that have been propagated.
A lot of people don't like that language, so I wasn't going to say grandfather or grandma.
All
So
right, I won't use that because.
you can.
Then, so it sounds like that you're trying to be charitable in if you're going to disturb the status quo, remove, if this happens upon review, remove lands that then may cause discontinuousness or less acres, that you want to give those CWMUs, cut them some slack so that they can continue to keep peace in the valley and maybe for other public benefit reasons. Can you describe a little bit about what you're thinking is there? I don't fault Mercy. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think you hit it. Is for us, it's really hard if a CWMU's performed well for almost 30 years, and now we take public land out of their CWMU to not at least give them an opportunity to continue forward when they've been a good partner for that long. I think that's our thought process, is don't want to just completely pull the rug out from underneath them, but it would still be a monitoring of, did that make it so they're not a good CWMU anymore? Were they relying on that public land? So we'd monitor that part of it going forward, but yeah, wouldn't necessarily want to just pull the rug out from underneath them.
Well, this gets complicated. We're going to have the biologist doing everything and then have everything come to us, and we're going to meet twice a week, it sounds like. And I think if you want to do that, we should have ice cream at about this time.
Oh, so dinner is not good enough anymore. It's got to be dinner and dessert. Okay. Duly noted.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chet.
Yeah, and I don't know that this part of it puts a whole lot more into it. I mean, we're already going to be hearing all of these because they do have public land in them. And maybe it is just when we do that, is at that point in time, we discuss whether we do the variances. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of looking for, generally speaking, if there would be support for variances for them to go forward, to let them continue, or if it's more, hey, you don't fit the program and time for you to hit the road.
The risk of saying too much, it seems like one important criterion is, has the CWMU been a good operator and have they provided good public benefit? Then you might be more inclined in that variance process to say, yes, we should continue. Or if they've been on probation a lot, or we've had issues, a lot of complaints from public hunters, whatever, then that might cause the scales to tip the other direction.
So you're thinking along the lines you're thinking is that there kind of be a broad brush variance for everybody and then see how they perform?
My thinking more is that we would do these individually when they come up, but that if the committee decided that it could continue on, that we could support would support that recommendation if it came from the committee. But with knowing that they are going to be monitored to make sure that they still perform well.
Are there any legal ramifications for the division if we didn't give a variance to a longstanding CWMU that had to have a lot of acreage pulled?
I'm not a lawyer, but by code, it says we have to look at these every 5 years. So I would say, from my understanding of code, and it's saying we're supposed to look at these, that I don't see how there could be.
I would say, Chad, if it's gone through our public process, the board, the wildlife board can decide what's a CWMU and what isn't. And I mean, there's always appeal processes beyond that. But anyways, I think we'd be on pretty good legal standing if we went through our public processes and minimums within the rule weren't being met. So
I've got a quick question, just of clarification, as I've read the rule on this. So to make sure we're all on the same page, we can't include corner-to-corner parcels in a CWMU to meet their minimum acreage currently per rule, right? But the rule doesn't really talk anything about non-contiguous pieces, but non-contiguous pieces generally are okay, aren't they? They just can't be used to reach a minimum acreage.
Right, yeah, so there are a few CWMUs where we have 10,000 acres here, and then another one where maybe it is 5,000 acres, maybe it's not, but yeah, we have granted those. I don't know if any recently. I know we had Skull Valley, but it could have been 3 separate CWMUs, but we just made it be one.
I have another one where I've got a big block and then I've got a piece up on top that's less than 5,000 acres. It's been granted a variance sometime in the past.
Yeah, and so all of those would require a variance. So
They do require a variance to what, though? Because the rule doesn't really say that it can't be.
It has to be contiguous. That's
Yeah.
the rule.
I don't think the rule says that.
Doesn't
It just says it to meet your minimum acreage, it has to be contiguous, but it doesn't actually say.
Maybe.
it doesn't specify one way or
I think
other.
there's two different things here. If you're trying to do corner to corner or non-contiguous in order to meet your minimum acreage, that doesn't work. But once you've had your minimum acreage in that big block, we have allowed corner to corner, we have allowed non-contiguous. And so I think there's two different criteria based on if you've met your minimum thresholds or not. Is that correct,
That
Chad?
makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, but I think even if they meet the minimum contiguous acres, that if they want non-contiguous, I think we've had them come through this variance process. It's just that generally we've supported those.
Okay, that was my
Have we
question.
supported them?
I couldn't find it in the rule that it wasn't
Yeah.
allowed, so you're just generally doing a variance just to make sure everything's copacetic.
Yeah, and I don't think it says either way, right? Like it
Correct.
doesn't say you can put it in, but it
Correct.
doesn't say you can't. So yeah, I think that's just the way we've handled it, is just go through that variance so it's out in the public.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions for Chad, or can we move on to committee discussion? Okay, committee discussion. Let me capture what actually, let's have the discussion. Or actually, let me capture what I've got in here, and then we'll see what we need to add to it. What I have here is if a CWMU has public land removed, we can support variances if they fall under acreage or become non-contiguous, kind of this concept of being grandfathered in. These CWMUs will be monitored for the next 3 years and evaluated for things like hunter harvest, hunter satisfaction, etc. CWMU should not be reliant on public land to be successful. And I think that goes back to that earlier point. If there's major drop-offs in those areas, we would reevaluate them at that point after a 3-year period. Moving forward, CWMUs will need to meet minimum acreage and contiguous requirements. CWMUs that have good operators and provide a good public benefit should continue. CWMUs will come before the committee individually, and corner to corner and non-contiguous is typically supported once minimum requirements are met. Did I miss anything else that we discussed? Or anything that we want to add to that? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Well-
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I hate to always be a contrarian, but I don't know that I'm comfortable with the broad brush variance to start out with. I don't know. That's a hard one for me to just say they will get that. I thought that he said that they would be allowed to continue with under acreage, or just allowed to continue under acreage for 3 years to see how they performed, something like that.
Yeah, and maybe I misunderstood that portion of it with Chad, but I thought that's what Chad brought up. And Mike, you're just saying you don't know if that makes sense because there might be some CWMUs that we just say, hey, look, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but they struggled as a CWMU as is. We pull a ton of public land out. Should we just rip off the Band-Aid sooner than later? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to speak for you. I just, okay.
I thought the only way they're going to get public lands removed is through going through a review, at which time they can make the case that they're not viable, or we can assess whether they're viable or not. And so it's almost like I don't think we need to give them a blanket variance. I think it's a case-by-case thing. Before they lose acreage, they'll be in the middle of a process that will determine how they go forward. And those may be factors of, well, we won't remove the acreage because this is a great CWMU. It's got a long history. And if we did, it would set a bad precedent of getting rid of a CWMU that is a big public benefit or something. I don't know, something like that.
Okay, good points. Any other things we need to discuss on this, or are we ready to move on?
Do you need a motion on this?
I think Chad's preference would probably be to have, what do you think, Chad? Well, as the chair, yeah, I think if we can give some direction to Director Shirley and the Wildlife Board through a motion on what do we do, because I think this is a reality. I don't think every CWMU that has public land is going to fall below minimum acreage. I don't believe they're all going to become non-contiguous, but I think we're going to have a handful. And with those, as an agency, I think we'll want to know how this committee feels about it and what we should do moving forward.
I'll make a motion then that we recommend to Director Shirley and the Wildlife Board that in the course of evaluating the CWMUs that potentially are at risk of losing public lands, that the consequences of possibly going under acreage or possibly being non-contiguous or having non-contiguous private lands be part of the evaluation in reviewing and determining whether public lands are removed and the fate of that CWMU going forward.
Just to clarify, Chris, would that be at the division and the biologist level, or would that be before this committee as well?
It would be both. The biologist level would make its recommendation, and we as a CWMU advisory committee would review that and make a recommendation to the director and the big game board.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion from Chris. Any discussion on the motion? I'll call for a second then.
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Tim. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Alicia, did you get that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate your help tonight. I know this isn't easy, especially being remote, so
She's watching the Olympics as she does this. It's actually a pretty good job.
I don't know if she's watching the Olympics or not. But I'm glad she's capturing all this, so thank you, Alicia.
Anytime.
Okay. Quick question for Chad. The gentleman that's here, is he with the Ingham Peak or the TL bar?
Ingham, yeah.
Okay, let's do Ingham first then. Okay.
Okay, Paul, do you have my other slideshow? If not, I left him on the end of this.
And again, real quick, just process for this. We'll hear a presentation from Chad, and then I would like to hear from, I assume you're the operator, is that correct? Yes. Okay. I'd like to hear from the operator about the benefits of including public lands in the CWMU, and then we can ask questions, and then we'll go to discussion as well. So.
Okay, so there's two renewing. There was four that had public land in them that we're going to renew this summer. So we wanted to hear these first, so before they renew this summer, they have an idea of what the recommendation from this committee and from the wildlife, or from division will be. So we have Ingham Peak and TL Bar that are renewing. And I just want to put it out there on the record too, is no matter what the recommendation is from this committee or the division, you will have the opportunity, if you oppose it, to still do a split recommendation and take it before the RAC and the board, if you so chose. And that doesn't hurt our feelings, at least not mine. My wife says I don't have feelings, so. Just an overview here, Ingham Peak, this is a deer elk moose CWMU. There's 16,000 private acres, 4,100 public acres. Talking to John earlier, I put in there that may drop their contiguous to under 10,000. That's not going to be the case, is what he's told me. And you have TL Bar, which is one of the two that came up earlier. It's actually not got the 5,000 minimum acres of private lands. The 640 acres puts them over that public land in there is not accessible by the public. So yeah, we'll start out with Ingham Peak, and then I'll give John a chance to talk here. But I brought this one up earlier because I knew it was coming in later, and I thought maybe we could save some time that way. So we've kind of gone over where those parcels are and what was accessible and what was not. You can see the trade lands in the black there. And I'm not 100% sure, John would maybe have to help me out if that one and up in the top left is part of it. And there's some more trade lands on the left. I don't know if those are included or if those are John's trade lands or different CWMUs. So what we're pretty much looking at on this one is if we took the public land out of that, I'm going to walk over here. If we took the public land out, then we could potentially have some corner to corner parcels in here if we're interested in keeping all the private land that was in it to continue to be in it. And I think that's all I have to say. So
I got a question. Can I ask him? So if you took out, and then this is just hypothetical, the accessible public land, does he still meet the acreage requirements?
Yeah. John said he still has, like, that piece there is 10,000 acres.
Okay, so it's 4,160 of public land acres. Of that 4,160, how much of it was accessible?
I don't know acreage wise, so it's everything essentially except these two are 40s and then this section.
Okay.
I think, just looking at it, I think that's all.
Mike, I just added it up and it's not a whole lot different. Most of that is basically accessible. If my math's right, it's about 3,100 acres that's got some sort of a road to it.
And one thing I did fail to mention is that his trade lands are, 1,600 more acres than the public land that he has in there. So he is opening up significantly more private lands in this scenario.
So his trade lands there's a lot more than what we're showing on the map, because that's only about
Yeah.
2,400 acres. So you're probably right, Chad, in that there are substantial trade lands going off the map.
And I think, Paul, if we need to, we opened up a web page with our hunt planner on it that shows trade lands, so we can this is one of the things that I'll admit as we work on trade lands that we need to do better is all these parcels are shown as trade lands, but they don't necessarily say which CWMU it belongs to. So I know that they're trade lands, but I don't know which CWMU is trading them.
John, you want to come up and introduce yourself real quick? That'd be great. And thanks for being here tonight with us.
You guys take good care of me. No, thank you for, I'm John Maxfield, the operator of the Ingham Peak CWMU. And so I don't want to go over anything that's not going to be of interest to you or help you out, but the historical aspect of that is that those ranch lands are basically within the railroad grant, 1869, when they built the railroad and went through every other section was public and private. And so I deal with the same problems that Riverview Ranch deals with. They're another railroad grant, CWMU, and then also Deseret. Deseret's probably the biggest railroad grant, CWMU. So I deal with the same problems that they have, but mine are on a smaller aspect. Historically, we tried to go with the deeded property boundaries, and in Box Elder County, that didn't work very well. I learned real fast that those boundaries, they're just difficult to deal with on every level. So when we first started to do a CWMU, it was in 1992, and it took 2 years to eventually create that. And what we did back then, that was back in the day Rick Danvere was on the board. The highest priority was to go to enforceable boundary, identifiable boundary. That was the highest priority. And so when we were looking at the property ownership, my own personal opinion is the best enforceable boundary is a fence line. It's easy to see, it doesn't move, it's always there, and it takes a physical effort for somebody to climb over that fence. And it's easy to post. It's easy to, when you're talking to somebody in the field, it's easy to describe to them. A fence line is, in my opinion, is the easiest enforceable boundary. After that would be a road. A road's another good one. After that would be a geological feature, a ridge line, a creek, anything that's a standard geological, whatever kind of boundary. The last one would be the deeded property lines. Those in a lot of areas are confusing. You have the question of, well, we didn't see the signs aren't there. They were covered in frost, it was dark. I'm sure that law enforcement's heard all kinds of stories over the years, no different than me about being able to see signs and understand where they are. So when you created the CWMU, the priority was we would go to a fence line. So that's what we did. We went to a fence line. If a fence line was not there, we went to a road. If a road wasn't there, then lastly, we went to a property line boundary. So my best boundaries are fence lines. My worst ones are the property lines. And in doing that, when we made that originally, to keep consistent. So these two sections right here, these two sections right here, and probably Eric knows, these are dry basin sections. In 40 years, I have never seen a deer in those two sections during the fall hunting season. unless you're a sage grouse, the deer don't, they use that in the wintertime, but they don't get there until December, January, February. So, and that's half of the public acreage that's included, but we did that because it got us to a fence line, which was a good boundary. And over the years, it's a bad trade for the operator, but it created the fence line, which was an important boundary. So if you weigh those two, I'm okay to take the bad acreage and go to a fence line. In my opinion, that was a good deal. And I have the same situation in this section here. That section, is accessed by a road. Historically, it had been kind of good hunting, but they've had some range improvements for the sage grouse. There's not a lot of trees. The junipers and the cedars are removed. So currently, it's another one. We haven't had anybody hunt that section in quite a while. But including that gets me to a road and a fence line, which is a good boundary. And so that's 3, which would be about 2,000. So that's quite a chunk of the land that we've traded to. The other land on the east that would be accessible, if you exclude the other public land, a lot of that is along the road. And when it's along the road, what happens, there's not a lot of big game hunting that occurs on a road because there's not a lot of big game when guys drive by all the time. The game gets pushed away from the roads. And I would count those as buffer areas. But we were happy to take them because it created a definable boundary. And over the years, I would say that that's an overwhelming consideration that you should look at is creating good boundaries, because I know that the state does it in all their limited entry units across the state. You guys go to strong boundaries, highways. I mean, they're easy for people to see. They're easy for people to understand. They're easy to post. It just creates a lot of confusion. And so anyway, so that's the history of the public land that's in the CWMU. So what we've offered to trade as trade lands, and I don't know, I'll have to go back and look at the map. I know this trade lands part is new to, we haven't done it before very long historically, but the trade lands that we've offered is basically there's 8.5 sections south that are all corner to corner alignment with this piece. This piece meets the minimum acreage. And then there's another 5,500 acres to the south that's all corner to corner alignment with this. And so there's 8.5 sections starting right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then there's one, I guess, to the west of that. So, and when you look at those checkerboard areas, the private guys can figure out a way to hunt those. It's inconvenient, but they can do it. But if you're a public hunter trying to hunt only those public lands within those checkerboard areas, it becomes a nightmare. And it becomes a nightmare to post, and it becomes a nightmare to patrol. And so, if you ask me, the best way to deal with those is on a trade basis, where you block up the opportunity and then you make the opportunity equal public and private. And I think that's a great way to do it. I think it benefits everybody involved. It's great for wildlife. It makes wildlife a resource to everybody. And so as trade lands, that's kind of the trade-off that we've offered, going forward on it. I don't know if there's anything else you want me to cover, or if I'm...
No, I think that was a great summary. Do we have any questions for either Chad or John?
I have one. What's your permit allocation? How does that work?
Because of the trade lands, what we've been doing, it's a 90-10 split.
So you're still at a 90-10.
But the ratio of my trade is, 5,700 to 4,160. Okay, now that's just a straight number. But then also, if you look at the opportunity it creates for the public because of that checkerboard ground, there's an element there that makes that 5,702 of the, anyway, it about doubles the opportunity because it makes the public lands into a contiguous hunting block area. So, really, it creates about a 10,000 or 11,000 acre, area of public hunting with the trade lands.
How's that land for hunting right there?
Pardon?
How is that land right there for hunting? You were saying that the portion of the BLM in your main block of your CWMU isn't any good. How is this down there in the checkerboard?
It's actually, well, it's better. Sorry. If I was to look at all the public land, the worst 3 sections are these 3, 1, 2, 3. This private ground down there is comparable to the public. The private is probably above the public because historically when it was homesteaded, the settlers the first thing they took was a water in that country. So they homesteaded or took the water. That was very first. So typically most of the water is on the private ground. And then they took, they just tried to take the best ground over the years and skip to the public. And, it's all marginal agricultural ground anyway. And it's probably amazing that 150 years, well, I don't know how long the Homestead Act lasted, but for 75 years, nobody ever homesteaded those public sections. So that kind of shows you, and it's probably no different in Wyoming or Deseret or, Riverview. It's, they were kind of skipped over historically.
So I'm a little confused on the map we're being shown. So the dark checked squares are trade lands, but then we're also saying that those checkerboard at the bottom are also trade lands?
These, I don't know. I know who owns these, and I know that these aren't the trade lands that I don't know, they're not the trade lands that I had in on my application. What I put in on my application would have been these.
Okay, so those are listed on the side as walk-in access. So are they trade lands or are they walk-in access? And I guess that's for the division. That's a question for the division. Or are you being paid
They
by
had been paid, they had been walk-in access before. I wanted to include them as trade lands going forward.
Okay, and so for the division, what was the price you paid for the walk-in access rights to those parcels?
I can't remember what the,
Let's
I
let
can't remember what the rate is.
Let's let Jim Christensen tackle that one if we can.
Pardon?
Jim, you want to come up and address that?
You want me to?
Jim, you can stay close by, but
Okay, sorry, what was the question?
The question is, what did the division pay per acre for that walk-in access right in the past?
I am not sure on that one. The walk-in access is run through the outreach section,
So
but we can get it.
do we know kind of a ballpark? I mean, is it like $1 an acre or is it $10 an acre? Does
I've
anybody know?
never had to deal with walk-in
Yeah,
access.
sorry, we can send this information to the committee afterwards. I don't know if we have anyone here from Outreach that could speak to it. Sorry about that.
But part of this application is to make those trade lands, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So John, are you saying that heretofore, there's been 4,160 acres of public land in your CWMU with no trade lands?
Correct.
The lands that I mentioned to the south that were red stippled on Onyx were the walk-in access, and you're proposing to pull them out of walk-in access and make them quid pro quo for plus some for the 4160. So it's 5702.
Years ago, when I first started the CWMU, there were different stipulations on the rules. The first one that came about was no non-contiguous. And then the second rule that came about was no corner to corner. And so over the years, those, as other CWMUs and other ground has come in different circumstances, it's my understanding that those two rules have been modified to currently, there's no stipulation on corner to corner, excepting a minimum 10,000 acres, core parcel or whatever you want to call it. And then there's no limit on and then there's no non-contiguous It's the same thing after a minimum acreage. Anyway, so those rules have changed over the years.
Well, they're still requiring a variance, but up
So-
to now, prior to this new proposal, what was your split where you were able to include 4,160? The 16,628, that's the new proposal. Is it, or is that the old number?
What we did, no, the private I don't think's changed, and I don't think the public's changed. So what we did before is we took the public and the private and just did the simple math on it. So, and that was a split.
So the ratio of 4,100 to 20,000 or something?
Let me just make a
About
comment
fifth.
here, Chris, that I think will answer your question.
Thank you.
I'm Sydney Lamb, the box elder biologist. So prior to this renewal, those trade lands were not included in his last renewal cycle. There were 0 trade lands. And so the compensation was reflected in the way that tags were allocated. So I don't have the exact number, but it wasn't a straight 90-10 split, right? The public received some tag compensation because there were no trade lands on the last renewal. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Sydney, before you sit down, can I ask you a question? Yeah. So these trade lands, have you been on this property?
Yes.
You're familiar with it?
Uh-huh.
How would you say these trade lands compare with the
You mean
acreage that's in?
these pieces that he's proposing to put in as trade lands, these
Yes.
pieces here?
Yes.
Excellent deer hunting habitat. And are used a lot. People harvest deer here all the time, as they have been in the walk-in access program, right, prior to this. I go classify deer there when I classify deer during the postseason classification, and I know people are hunting in there. And in fact, the access is way better than most walk-in access areas. Most walk-in access areas, right, you've got a gate, and you just get out of your truck and you walk. But actually here, you're allowed to drive your truck on the roads that are available, and then you can get off and walk like when you're in the private sections. And so from my perspective, in this area, these are pretty valuable to your public hunter.
I'll just second what Sydney says. I've personally benefited from those parcels. I won't tell you what I was pursuing, but I'll just say that I benefited.
John has characterized the sitless section in the upper right and those sections right there on the south, there's being mud flat or lake bottom or something, the yellow, the dry basin.
That'd be right here. These are two. And Eric can tell you, Eric probably knows these by his, probably knows them.
I would say John's assessment was pretty accurate. I do catch a lot of deer migrating through this corridor, but not necessarily like during the hunting season. And I think it's fair to say that there's a pretty main road that comes here that honestly does like push a lot of deer out of this area. There isn't any cover for them to like be sitting there in the morning when some average Joe's gonna come hunt. And also pretty true for here. I haven't encountered a lot of deer in this dry basin area. It's very sage grouse heavy, this particular piece.
Thank you.
What it boils down to, it's lower elevation, dry basin, and that resulting state section is largely Wyoming sagebrush. As you move on to that south, you bump up on a bench, you pick up a little more mountain browse. Yeah, so it's a little, as a range person, I would say it's a little bit better condition than the trade. So I think his characterization is correct.
What about elk?
Elk are kind of hit and miss. They're everywhere, but then they're nowhere.
If it counts, I've seen elk on that block of the checkerboard private public. At the time, I wasn't exactly sure where, but they were within that block. So I've seen elk, deer, sage grouse, and some unmentionable species that I won't tell you that were there for personal reasons.
Just in full disclosure, I own a ranch that borders this property right at the bottom edge. And I can concur that there's excellent habitat there for deer. And I think the elk herd is growing there, but it's hit and miss.
How many elk tags do you have?
I think we've done 6.
How come on the division's website, it shows that there aren't any public permits this year?
Yeah, that's not a loaded question. We're just here. We're looking at the Utah
I'll
Hunt
take
Planner,
that one.
and it says there's no elk and no moose tags for the public hunter, and so we're just trying to wrap our minds around it.
So this is something that we messed up on the divisions end. I have a note in here. Let's see. We had it wrong in the database. So when we migrated over from paper to the database, John hasn't. This will be his. He's one of those that hasn't done this database yet. So when it migrated over, our splits came in wrong, and he actually took an extra public hunter a year before, so to make up for it. That's why there's no public ones this year.
Nice, that's a good answer. I like that.
And the moose is every other year. So this is the off year for.
Any other questions from the committee for either John or Sydney or Chad? All right, if not, let's turn it to
Thank you.
committee discussion. Thank you.
So one thing that I want to talk about, I'm glad this has come up tonight because I don't know if you guys follow what's going on in the courts right now, but the corner-to-corner thing is kind of a big deal. And so I'm always going to have my eyes open when we have a CWMU that is allowing trade lands in an area like this, because technically in the state of Utah, you cannot cross corner-to-corner on public land. Right now, there's not a law that supports it. As a matter of fact, it's my understanding the DWR is encouraged to tell public hunters you cannot do that because it does constitute trespass. Now, there happens to be a court case in Wyoming going right now that might be something that will change that. But for now, we operate within the rules that are on the book or with what's going on right now. And this does indeed open up a bunch of lands, or if it was already open, it's not going to close a bunch of lands to public access. It is important for us on this committee to make sure we maintain a really good open access. Anytime a private property owner is going to allow us to do something like this, there is a big benefit coming to the public that is bigger than 5,700 acres.
John, the boundary on the west side there along that ridge where it doesn't follow a straight north-south, that's a fence line on that ridge line.
Go to a mic if you're going to answer. Let's do that.
Is there a road up there on that kind of triangle boomerang configuration?
It is, and the road is into, let's see, the road is into the private, and so we actually have gone to the road or the fence rather than the property lines. Property lines are on most of the time are on the west drainage, and the road is on the top. So we've just I've always gone to a fence where I could because that was a better boundary, even though it might differ than the property lines.
Any other discussion?
I struggle a little bit with this one because pulling it out of walk-in access, I would imagine that that's a monetary benefit for the CWMU to gain more hunting tags, which it's a business. At the same time, I think that I tend to agree with Greg that providing public access to other public parcels in a more feasible manner is a good thing, but it's not as cut and dried for me, I guess. I need to think about it for a little bit longer, but it does, pulling, I don't know what they pay. I've heard they pay $1 an acre-ish. So, $5,000 or less. And they're going to gain an elk tag and multiple deer tags. That's a substantial That's a substantial cost difference of what we have been afforded in the past.
I think one of the questions is, so we've passed motions tonight saying that if public lands are included in the CWMU, it needs to be reviewed. So let's pretend that, John, we're coming in and offering the status quo, a renewal of the status quo. What would our attitude be then? Would we allow the public lands again in the same split? Would we justify that? Or is he beating us to the punch in a way of saying he's got a proposal that's perhaps better, that doesn't make him vulnerable to running the gauntlet of guessing what we might or might not do? And again, we're just recommending a course, but.
Chris, I think you bring up a good point, because the very first one we talked about was that as a general rule, accessible public lands should be excluded unless they can provide and demonstrate a public benefit. And, I think about Mike going back to the central region, and on the surface, if somebody sees a map like this, they say, man, that's a lot of public land that's included. We get the privilege and opportunity to hear the potential benefits of this. And I don't think it's hypothetical. I mean, he's here to renew, and we need to make a motion and a recommendation one way or the other to the director and the board. But I think what we're tasked with is, are these benefits, these public benefits, are they going to outweigh the inclusion of having this public land in there? And unless someone sees it differently. So,
Like the public land in the trade, I may have missed this. There was talk about, is it just for the species in the CWMU? Is it for small non-game species? Is it for the whole shooting match? Is it during the season, or is it all year? Explain how that works.
I already need to go look at the minutes, because that was a motion, that was part of a motion, right, that we discussed earlier. And I thought the thought was that it would be for all species that it would be opened up.
Yes, that was it sounded to me in the motion that basically it just, in layman's terms, it turns that into basically public access all the time. And I guess the other thing that I was thinking is, I get looking at that map, which is that transparency piece that we've been talking about. So now if we have these meetings and everybody comes to present their argument, if you will, to the board, then other people down in the central unit, let's say, when they look at that, they go, holy cow. But then they can see the notes and say, oh, okay, it did close down this 4,100 acres or whatever it is, but it opened up 8,000 more or whatever of this checkered access that I couldn't get, which we can also have those notes in there, because we requested that the biologist is going to also chip in. And the biologist already kind of said, yeah, this isn't the greatest habitat, but this new stuff that now everybody would have access to is a whole lot better habitat for that wildlife. As a public hunter, I would lean on being okay with that trade personally, knowing that I have access to better land and he has the, for lack of a better term, garbage, just so he could build an easier boundary.
It seems like, though, that it's quite a leap to go from allowing public access for the species in the CWMU during a big game season to year-round access for everything under the sun. Is that Mike's?
My interpretation of it is it's only for hunting. It's traded for hunting purposes. It's not traded to go four-wheeling. It's not traded to go.
But does our rule address it? Does our rule address trade lands and go into the detail as to what is allowed and what isn't? Because if not, that's probably something that we need to correct the next time that rule is open. So Jim, Chad, any thoughts on that or anything else?
Yeah, for that one, my understanding is the property just needs to provide comparable hunting opportunities. Going back to initial questions on walk-in access fees, it actually lists it on our website. I looked it up. For 5,000 acres, depending on the length of the contract, 5,000 acres plus on a 5-year contract is $2,218 per year.
So, sorry, Jim, real quick, and maybe you don't have the answer to this, and that's okay. When we talk about comparable, that's pretty vague. I mean, are we talking about, are you trading an area with a bunch of conifers with another area with a bunch of conifers? Are we talking comparable, meaning if they give this, if they're saying this is for a deer CWMU, then you can hunt deer there? I mean, I think internally, this is probably a rule that we need some correction on. And I think we've got some good guidance from the committee today. So that way, as we take a rule forward, that we realize it is for hunting purposes, all species, all protected wildlife. I think, because that's the type of, that's the benefit you would get on public lands and that are being enrolled in that CWMU. As Mike pointed out, you can still get that if they're accessible, but not all of these are accessible. And so
I think that's a good point. If the trade is public lands that are open for all of those hunting opportunities, and now these are replacing it, although I could see that.
Well, and like it was stated, the public land was included to make it easier on the CWMU to define their boundaries. So it's a benefit to the CWMU on that end to have the public land included.
Well, it's a monetary benefit too.
Yes. So it's a monetary benefit to not have to deal with that. And then it's a huge monetary benefit to pull those other parcels out of the walk-in access. And then which I actually find myself struggling with that concept, because I mean, it's $2,000 a year, and I don't know what an elk tag and a couple deer tags go for and out there, but it's
priceless,
substantial,
priceless.
So I struggle with the concept. I understand the business side of it, but I struggle with that concept, because we're including those public lands in there at a pretty high benefit to the CWMU.
The flip side of that is the public lands aren't really good habitat, and they're just holding the earth together. And the lands that he's offering, although he's offered them through walk-in access, now he's offering them on a different basis. It's true he has a high incentive to do that, because he's going to recoup some of the split beyond the 90-10 normal split. He'll be back to 90-10 under the proposal. But if we start looking under the hood too much of the economics of that part and what motivates a CWMU operator, the intent is to increase. Part of the intent is to increase landowner tolerance for state-owned wildlife on their property. The other part of the intent is to provide. Important part is to provide public access to lands that otherwise wouldn't be. And I don't know Greg's the reality of his no trespassing on kitty corner boundaries, but if there's any truth to that at all, instead of 5,700 acres, it opens up 11,400 acres on a no questions asked basis. So it seems to me that this proposal makes a lot of sense.
I've got one more question, if that's okay. Maybe it's to Chad or Sydney. With these trades, sometimes we see CWMUs that have the trade lands, and that's it. And then we see trade lands with an additional public permit. Is the only trade-off here the trade lands, and that's it? No additional public permits?
Yeah, generally speaking, we give an additional permit if those numbers were reversed. So if he was getting 5,700 public land and he was only trading 41, well, to make up that difference of not getting the extra acreage is where we usually take the tag.
Thanks for that clarification.
Chad, how many permits is the public losing if we go to the 90-10 versus the prior regime?
That's good. Yeah. Cindy will look that up. While she's looking that up, I just want to throw out a couple things. I think one thing to consider too is this has been walk-in access. Maybe he's never posted it. That doesn't mean he could post it tomorrow and he could close that all down. So I think that's important to keep in mind here. And also, as we talk about what access the public has, whether it be for everything or just big game or just the species, probably important to ask John what his feelings are on it too, because that might be something too where if we said, oh, it's for everything, he might say, well, never mind.
Well, Chad, I don't think, I agree. I mean, I would love to hear what John has to say on this. And in addition to that, we can't be arbitrary that way. We can't have some trade lands that are only good for deer and then turn around and have other trade lands that are good for upland. I mean, how would we ever present that information to our public? That's why I'm saying when we get an opportunity to review this and roll, we're really going to have to clarify it, because I mean, it's complicated enough to figure out where these are and what you can do. If there's different stipulations on each one, I think that's more challenging. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Just to answer the permit question. So on their prior renewal, they were receiving a total of 37 deer permits, and 10 of those were public permits. So that's like a 27% roughly split over the normal 90-10. 37 total permits with 10 public. Good question.
Hey, while you're looking at that, John, do you want to speak to that real quick? Like with these, I mean, you know how this committee feels about the ability to have trade lands be open to everything. Are you open to that, or are you looking for just the deer, elk, and moose component of it?
Well, when I think back and look at all those CWMU signs, when the CWMU signs, and I'd have to look, it's been a while since the division used to actually print those and give them to the operators. And then they kind of got out of that. But there's a clause in those, and I'm going to probably slaughter it, whatever. But on those, but in reference to the public land, they did not, any other activity besides specifically hunting those specific species wasn't affected. So as far as including public land in a CWMU, it was only for the purposes of those specific species within the CWMU. It didn't affect upland game. It didn't affect photography. It didn't affect whatever else other activity the public deemed on those public lands. It didn't affect any of those. And so I just assumed that criteria would carry forward, in that if you were on trade lands, if you were trading for deer or elk or whatever else, it would just be specifically for those. I've never, I haven't looked at anything else or assumed that it was inclusive of any others, because I know that the old CWMU signs weren't. They were just specific.
Okay, thanks for that. And I do, again, I think this is something we're going to have to take through our racks and board and get some clarification on, one way or the other. You got that
Just to
data.
briefly answer the elk tag question, there were 6 total tags given, 2 of which were public, so a 33% split rather than your regular 90-10.
Sydney, while you're up there, what's your recommendation on this?
Meaning what I think we should do? Is that what you're asking?
What's your opinion?
The Ingham Peak CWMU has been good to work with. We haven't had any complaints or put them on probation. I mean, there's a lot that you guys are discussing. I don't know that I can address like every single piece in a succinct recommendation right at this moment, but I mean, I think we have to at some point decide what we think our standards are, like you have in the past motions, and kind of stick to those. Whatever the decision may be, I would be really sad to see those sections at the bottom lost to the public hunter. I think that is honestly a really valuable piece of deer hunting in West Box Elder. Additionally, I think the trade lands issue is a mess. From our perspective, even myself as someone who uses a lot of maps and is familiar with many of the division's web pages, it's hard for me to figure out, like, those trade lands that are marked on this map don't belong to the Ingham Peak CWMU. I didn't even know that prior to this meeting. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but if you have something more specific, I'd be happy to.
I think you kind of answered the question, Sydney. I mean, really what our committee and why we're including the biologists in these decisions, what we're interested in is, are the trade lands that the public are now going to have access to going to be kind of comparable to what the CWMU gets? And you've answered it in saying that I would sure hate to see that deer hunting opportunity go away from the public. And sounds like there's a lot of public that feel the same way that you do. And that's really what we're most interested in. Thank you.
Certainly.
Can I ask you a question while you're there?
Sure.
Would you feel bad if chucker hunters were to lose that access there to hunt?
These same pieces on the bottom?
How would you feel about that?
I mean, they're a chucker there, if that's what you're asking me.
Oh, I know. There's chuckers all over, but that's what we're getting down to.
Well,
his feeling would be that you could only hunt deer, elk, and moose on those parcels. Whereas in the past, your walk-in access provided access to hunt cottontails and doves and chuckers and elk and deer and moose and all kinds of species for $2,000 a year.
Is that true? Walk-in access includes all those?
Correct. I mean, they can enroll what they want to allow, but it can include all of those species, yes.
And is there a differential pay scale if there are fewer species?
This is a rule that I'm not incredibly familiar with, but.
When you said that the trade issue is a mess, were you referring to the fact that the maps aren't accurate, or could you elaborate?
I mean, when you look at this as trade lands as a public benefit, which is I think how we're looking at it, the fact that the public, let alone the professional, doesn't know where the trade lands are or who they belong to or who can access them or when, that's a bit of a.
So it's a communication problem.
Correct.
Or
I think
an informational problem.
Correct. On our end, yes, absolutely.
And back to the payment side too, we've been researching back here. So depending on what you enroll will determine how much money you get. We've been looking at it too. There's a $5,000 cap on any walk-in access, but the 5,000 acres, that has to all be contiguous. Where these are not contiguous, they go off the 640 acre pay scale, which is $800 and something dollars. So $842, something like that, times 8.5 puts him well over the $5,000 cap. So he's right at the $5,000 per year.
Not the 2,000 you mentioned.
Right. Yep.
We've been at this for a while. I think we've heard some good stuff. We've gone back and forth with the Q&A, internal discussion, back to Q&A, internal discussion. I think we have a lot here. I don't know if I've done as good a job summarizing this, but I think I'm going to try and clarify what I've heard. And if I'm missing something, great. But I would like to entertain a motion sooner than later on this topic. What I've heard is that trade lands are clearly more beneficial than the public lands enrolled in this CWMU. There's better habitat, there's more deer in the area, and it blocks up more land for the public hunters and for the CWMU to have that be a continuous block. The public lands enrolled in the CWMU are to clearly mark boundaries via roads, fences, or ridge tops. And I haven't been to the property, Sydney has, but based on John's testimony, it seems like that's the reason that they're there. The trade lands that we're discussing used to be in walk-in access, and we need to clarify, again, as an agency, this is tangential a little bit, but it's more for us. We need to clarify trade lands for hunting all protected wildlife, what that's going to look like for us in rural. And the biologist, in her remarks, said she would sure hate to lose those trade lands down there. It's good habitat. And then there's been a lot of other discussions. So with that information, I think if we have anything new to add, I'd love to hear it. And if not, I'd love to hear a motion.
So one clarifying question. I'm not sure I'm ready to make a decision until there's clarification on that rule. Because we don't know whether we're giving up, potentially just deer hunting on those sections, or whether it's, I think it's reasonable to put some boundaries on there, right? The hunting only occurs from September 1st to January 31st or something like that. But to me, the trade to have value to the public has to encompass more than just deer. And so I think for me to make a decision on this, we need clarification from the DWR on that rule.
And I don't know if we have it. I think what we could do is make a motion. This committee can make a motion to include the type of hunting you would like to see. And then we could do that for trade lands moving forward before we clarify that in rule. I mean, that could be an option for us, but unless, Chad, do you have do you have more clarification on this rule?
Could we make it provisional? Could the motion be provisional?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to clarify on that. It's really vague. It really says it has to be a public benefit. So I would think if this committee thought for it to be a public benefit that it needed to include other species, where maybe it doesn't have a lot of moose habitat, maybe you can throw something else in there, and then it would be up to the operator too, if he didn't, if those are the provisions that are put in there, that he could say, well, I don't like those and don't want to do the trade land, would be my thought.
And I would recommend too, just for alignment's sake, I don't think we should get into the seasons and any of that stuff. I think we should list things like upland game, and then upland game hunting can be allowed, because I don't want to have a motion that our seasons don't align with our seasons in the upland game guidebook and that type of stuff. That would be a cluster. So,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
I want to make a comment and then a motion if possible.
Okay.
The comment is, what it appears is going on a little bit is, we have a landowner who availed himself of a policy or a practice of allowing walk-in access and being compensated for it. Now, and we're in some ways punishing him for having done so, I think, by saying, well, you're going to pick up 6 more deer and another elk perhaps, by offering these trade lands, pulling them out of our walk-in access program and putting them into your CWMU, when the lands in the CWMU public lands are of low quality, and it's been amply demonstrated that the former walk-in and currently proposed trade lands are of high wildlife and hunting value. And so it seems like, as the old adage goes, no good deed goes unpunished. If he hadn't have had walk-in access and he were making this proposal, we would probably have a different opinion. So we're punishing him for having availed himself of an existing program. And so a little bit of that, so my motion is the following, and although I don't want to make it, I saw a hand about to reach a mic when I rudely spoke out first. So I'm gonna, Tim? Okay. My motion would be that we recommend to the director and to the big game board the renewal of the Ingham Peak CWMU as follows: that it be allowed to include the some 4,160 acres of public land as disclosed on the map, that it accept in trade some 5,702 acres as also proposed, that the public be allowed to shoot or to hunt the big game species of deer, elk, and moose, and upland game birds during the respective seasons of such species on such trade lands, and that there be no adjustment for the inclusion of the public lands in the split of tags between public and private. In other words, that the operator could choose a 90-10 or an 85-15 or a 60-40 or the other available options for splits.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second by Tim. Any discussion on the motion?
One thing I would say is that there's not a moose opportunity in that area given through the public draw outside of the CWMU. And so there should be some kind of consideration given for that fact that that public lands within the CWMU most likely could include moose, some of those higher elevation.
Okay. Well, we have a motion, we have a second. Let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have 6 in favor, 1 opposed, with that being Mike Christensen. Mike, do you want to talk about your opposition for the record?
I think the CWMU program is held to a higher standard, as we've heard many times, and I think that the public is not getting necessarily the short end of the stick, but I think that it's just not a comparable situation. I think the CWMU is benefiting more than has been stated from the inclusion of their public lands.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to our last agenda, or not our last one, the last one that'll come before us with public lands. So Chad, do you want to finish with the TL Bar Ranch?
Yeah. Do we know if Del Christiansen's online?
Oh,
Paul?
sorry, real quick, before we move on. Alicia, did you get that last motion?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry, go ahead. You're asking if Dell's online?
Yeah, he said he's going to join online, but I didn't see him, so
Okay.
I don't think he's here. Okay, so this one hopefully is simpler than the last one. So the public land in this one you can see is up towards the top there. It's not accessible. 640 acres, like stated before. It doesn't reach the 5,000 acres without the public land. The public benefit is honestly they do one public and one private tag every year. So it's a 50-50 split where it could be a 60-40 split. Yeah, with that being said, yeah, I would take any questions.
Okay, any questions for Chad?
This looks very linear, north to south.
I'd just like to make a comment before maybe you have a chance to ask questions. I think a couple things that are important to note about this CWMU as we talk about it. First of all, the pronghorn population in this area is going like this. When the CWMU was created, there are some agricultural fields, I think, in this area. They were being irrigated at the time, so it would suck the pronghorn in and create a problem for the landowner, hence why the CWMU was created. They no longer irrigate those fields, so not only is the pronghorn population going down, but you're not really getting, like I think I counted 10 pronghorn on this whole thing, my last classification this last season. Other thing I think that you cannot see represented on this map, but those of you looking at Onyx would be able to see, much of this CWMU is salt, as in like salt flats. And so I just think that information is like pertinent to your decision or to your conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Well, while you're there, do you feel like this CWMU helps you meet your management goals for the pronghorn herd in that area?
No.
Do we know about success rate? I mean, if there's 2 permits on there, are they killing any antelope on this?
I'm fairly certain, I looked at it pretty recently, that yes, they harvest.
So one public hunter is given the opportunity.
That's
They're
correct.
still shooting an antelope on
That's
this
correct.
piece of ground.
Yep.
Thank you.
Are there any doe tags associated with the CWMU?
Yeah, so it's 2 and 2. And both doe tags are, I should have mentioned that, they're both public tags. So it's 3 public hunters to 1 private. So in that way, there is that public benefit, yeah.
So if the herd is declining, bucks are relatively irrelevant to the herd, overall health of the herd, but
correct.
Is there consideration to pull back the 2 doe tags, both the private and the public,
Yeah.
without changing, the CWMU necessarily?
I would take that into consideration for this renewal, yeah.
But I don't know that that's under our purview to comment on tag allocation, correct, Justin? Chad?
Yeah, I'll let Chad tackle that.
Well, I think in this instance, when we're talking about public benefit, I think it will allow it, I guess.
From the biologist standpoint, I guess the only tricky thing about talking about tag allocation is we don't start these renewals until June. So like, while I know a lot about the CWMU and I've thought about it, I'm talking to the operator about what we're going to do with the CWMU starting in June, not now. So.
Yeah, but you do have the opportunity to present your permit numbers. And that's one thing that I think the public would love to see, is that the CWMUs take a hit or give more opportunity in accordance with how the herd's doing. So when those permit numbers are presented, Chad takes them around and here's the central rack yell at him. Those permit numbers aren't necessarily set in stone, are they, in their core? It's a yearly process that they're given, and the biologist, in my opinion, should have, aren't they, we pass them yearly.
Well, you pass them yearly for CWMUs that are renewing, and then those permits are, what you're passing that year is for the next 3 years.
Yeah. Okay, because that's right. They changed that. So with the antlerless, are they also passed in the 3-year period? Well, that needs to change. That's a off the hand comment. But
with that being said, Mike, we can do a change application every year. So even though they are passed for 3 years, like I just sent out an email to all the CWMU operators saying, if you want to make changes, and to the biologist on either side, if you feel like there needs to be made changes, let's make them.
Okay, that's what my intent and understanding was. Sorry if I didn't speak that properly.
So you had mentioned that you didn't feel like this CWMU is helping you meet your management objectives. So could you explain that a little bit in a little more detail? Why is it not helping you meet your management objectives?
It's 4 tags. I mean, yeah, that influences the herd, especially as the herd is declining, but like those same 4 tags could be harvested by a public hunter right here. Like, yeah, sometimes they get sucked to this old, what used to be irrigated and cultivated, which is just kind of fallow at this point. But the same guy that's harvesting on this CWMU right here, I mean, that pronghorn's coming from here. It's not just like sitting on the CWMU all day.
How many doe tags do you give for that area through the public draw?
Ooh, good question. As this is the first time we've done this, you'll be seeing more of me, and I'll come better prepared for the next ones. But I can get back to you on that in a minute, Mike.
You're asking for the unit as a whole? Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Sydney, I've got a question for you. Just looking at the public benefit, it says pronghorn only, and they do a 50-50 split instead of a 60-40. If you only have 2 tags, is that really a public benefit? It was going to be 1 and 1 anyways.
Yeah, that,
Or maybe sorry, I'm not trying to put you in a weird spot. I'm just.
Yeah, let me take that one. Sometimes we do those over a 3-year and make sure that it's like 60-40 over 3 years. So potentially we would, over a 3-year period, give 1 extra tag to the private, and it wouldn't be a straight 50-50 over that. But I get your point. And I do think if you do the calculations, it's a 12% different, not a 10% is what they would owe.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for?
In looking at the aerial map that I have up on Onyx with Eric's help, it appears that there's quite a bit of water on this property, albeit they may not be irrigating alfalfa, but it seems to have a lot of springs on it and things, which would then, while the antelope may be spending time all over, but they probably do enjoy coming down for a drink in those areas. That's why I said it's linear. I think it's linear because some springs manifested along the toe of that slope, and those were homesteaded as opposed to some of the other lands. So I can see, again, in an effort to get the landowner to become a partner in tolerating big game on his property, I can see some rationale for having a CWMU, the 50-50 split, and it's small number for it. It probably doesn't accomplish anything as far as the biology goes. It's neither here nor there. If it were here or not, it's more of a question of the landowner will be tolerating. He'll have the pronghorn on his property regardless, and this maybe as a way to equalize some of that.
I suppose I'll just speak to that briefly because that's a good point, Chris. Prior to my time as the district biologist, and when they were irrigating this CWMU, there were a lot of removals happening for depredation purposes here. So, I mean, that you bring up a valid point that potentially, if we say we don't see a public benefit here and we make a decision, kind of on that side of the line, that may then hurt the herd health more because then I'm out there trying to mitigate for depredation damages. So I do think that was an initial part of why this became a CWMU, even though the tag numbers are so low.
Okay, if there's nothing else, let's turn it to committee discussion and move towards a motion. Would you like me to summarize what I have so far? Is this even helpful when I do this stuff? Or okay,
We think
am I just wasting everybody's time?
you could get along without us if we just go with your summary and be done.
What I have is the CWMU provides 1 public and 2 doe pronghorn permits. There's a lot of property in the salt flats. The CWMU is not needed necessarily to reach management goals. It has been helpful in the past to alleviate depredation, and the cultivated crop is gone to fallow. So, anything to add, discussion-wise? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So we're hearing this thing because the 640 acre piece is in there that technically is not legally accessible by the public unless there's some easement we don't know about. And they're in for renewal. No one's going to want to make a motion because I don't know that anybody really has strong feelings one way or the other. I like the last thing that the biologist had to say, and that is that it keeps an option in our tool bag to manage a herd if it does end up needing to be done at some time. I guess before, I don't know if I'm going to make a motion, but my thought is, why not approve it with the condition of, hey, let's keep making sure you keep taking care of the public hunters. And if the public hunters are happy and we're keeping access to some public ground for public hunters, why wouldn't we do it?
Chad, do we have any sort of satisfaction? I mean, what's the survey numbers look like? Do we have those numbers?
As he's looking up satisfaction, I did look up hunter success rates, and it has been 100% for the does and the bucks. So, but if you have anything on hunter satisfaction.
Yeah, I don't have specific satisfaction, but I think it's high.
It was 5.0 in 2020.
Yeah, traditionally speaking, it's been highly satisfied and highly successful for the public.
5 out of 10 isn't very high.
No.
I'm kidding. It's 5 out of 5. Yeah. I'm ready for a motion.
All right, let's make a motion. So I make a motion that we recommend to the Wildlife Board that we approve the application for the TL Bar Ranch, CWMU, continuing forward with a piece of inaccessible public land within it, maintaining the same splits for the pronghorn that they're hunting out there, and encouraging the CWMU operator to continue to make it be a good benefit to the public, help them to be successful and enjoy that hunting experience. That's it.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second? Second from Mike Lauder. The original motion was from Greg Wilding. Any discussion on the motion? If not, I'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Great, passes unanimously. Alicia, did you capture that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Great. We've got 2 more items. The next is just other business, future agenda items, those types of things. I'll throw that out there. So Chad, real quick, we've got 2 more meetings, correct? The next one is going to focus on antlerless harvest. Is that, or what's the next one?
The next one is the variances. So
Oh,
under
that's right.
acreage or extended season variances.
Okay, some variances, and then after that, it's antlerless harvest.
Yeah, and that's next week for the variances. And
Right.
then we haven't set a date for antlerless stuff yet.
Well, I would say this, it's late, it's 9:37. If we have a couple items that we want Chad to consider for future meetings, let's get them out there. If not, I'd encourage you to email him individually and have those conversations. Anything that's pressing now that we want to send his way? Okay, if not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Perfect. All in favor? Amen. Have a good night.